the Atelier Caprice, all the workers gathered in a small fitting room. There in front of a large mirror circled a charming girl in a wedding dress. It was magnificent, made of lace and the finest net, woven from hundreds of patterns and elements that were cut out by hand and sewn to the base. The silhouette was in the shape of a mermaid, and it suited the bride very well. The women praised one of the seamstresses and marveled. "Vanessa, you are a magician. What beauty sewed for her daughter. Such a dress in the boutiques cost crazy money. Mary's going to be the prettiest bride in town." "She sure is. I don't know how you did it." Mary was thrilled, too. She jumped up and hugged her mom. "Mummy, you're magic. We did it together. Now we can tell everyone we bought it at the salon. They'll believe it, and my mother-in-law will be jealous. She kept saying we can't buy a decent one." "Oh, what a nasty Mrs. Caroline. I can't bear it. She's got me on edge. It's a good thing Daniel's got his own flat. I wouldn't be living with his mom. All she does is measure everyone by their money. As if you and I were any different from the rest of the town." Vanessa shook her head. "But I wish things had worked out with Daniel. I wish you nothing but happiness, my daughter. But my heart is not in the right place. He's not the right man for you. Daniel's a difficult lad. He's a difficult character. And his mother is a snake. I don't think she'll let you live in peace. She'll make a bloody mess of things. Even though she lives with a young lover, she judges other people." Mary listened half-heartedly to her mother's lamentations, twirled round and round, and was in anticipation of the wedding. The future with her beloved seemed happy and cloudless. Mary grew up in an ordinary family. Mom, a seamstress, dad, a taxi driver. Parents lived well. Daughter loved and tried to give her the best. She has always remembered the best moments of her childhood. How Daddy teaches her to swim and dive. They synchronously clamped their noses together and laughed, while Mum blew on her broken knees and carefully smeared them with green. How they all went to the seaside together, riding on the boat and eating sweet grapes. But when Mary turned 13, everything changed. Daddy was gone in a rainy autumn when a large sub flew into the bus stop, where he was standing at breakneck speed. The drunk driver didn't even call an ambulance and tried to flee into the yards. Mary always remembered this terrible funeral. The crowd of people, tears, condolences, and Daddy, who lay motionless in the coffin. Mum was screaming so much she was dragged away from the coffin by force. But the daughter couldn't cry. Her childish brain refused to understand that Daddy was gone and would never be. Since then, their life with Mum has changed a lot. They long got used to living together, cried together, embraced, longed. But slowly they came to their senses. Mum never got together with anyone else. There was no room in her heart for other men. She carried her love for her late husband through her life. Mary always got on well with Mum, tried to help her. She also learned to sew, worked part-time in an atelier, and in parallel studied at the university for a fashion designer. Her dream was to open her own clothing line for full-figured women. It is very unfair that in clothing markets and shops they are sold some stupid hoodies and shapeless, faceless trousers with ridiculous patterns that make them look even bigger. One day her friends invited her to a student's party. They invited guys from another economics university. Mary came there in a suit, which she sewed herself, and amazed all the girls who wondered where she bought such a thing. And Daniel Johnson wouldn't leave her side. And that's how they met. The young men began to meet. The love was mutual. Mary thought she was very lucky. The guy was exemplary, already working part-time and delving into entrepreneurship. He gave the bride expensive gifts, baskets of flowers, surrounded by attention, and passionately whispered about love, kissing hotly. One thing upset Mary. The groom was terribly jealous. He could suddenly come to her house at night and wake everyone up, as if checking whether she was home or not. Always met her after lectures in his car. Whenever she chatted with a fellow student a little longer than she should have, Daniel would scowl and reprimand her. "Who the hell is that guy? You don't get to make eyes at guys. You're my fiancé and I won't stand for it. When I see another man looking at you, my blood boils." The bride laughed and kissed her lover. "Daniel, what are you doing?" "It's Nicholas Pete. He has a fiancée, my close friend Anne. It's just that we go out in the same company. We've been friends for a long time. He asked for the notes. He's too lazy to write in class. What do you think you're doing? I only love you and I don't need anyone else." The guy replied, "You're almost my wife now. So forget about companies and strange girlfriends. I won't tolerate such things. You are only mine, and I'm not going to share you with anyone." The girl was always smoothing things over. She thought jealous meant she loved him, and it even felt good that Daniel didn't notice anyone else but her. She hoped that after the wedding he would stop being jealous and calm down. All her friends were jealous that Mary had met such a fiancé. This was not a hungry student who could only offer moonlit walks in a dormitory. Daniel had a complicated family. His mother owned a famous restaurant. She looked much younger than her years, looked after herself, was always impeccable, expensively dressed, and lived with her young lover, Andrew. The character of Mrs. Caroline was not sugar. She was accustomed to everything to rule, to lead. She had no tolerance for objection or bickering. And of course she adored her only son and dreamed that he would marry a girl from their circle. Therefore, when Daniel brought the chosen one to the mansion to get acquainted, Mrs. Caroline made her a real interrogation. She kept asking who her parents were, what kind of family, where she went to school, and wrinkled her nose. Mary was so uncomfortable. She didn't think she and her mom were deprived or poor. Not at all. They lived like everyone else, and the repairs were good, and they dressed decently. A normal family. But by Mrs. Caroline's standards, the bride was not up to their level. She didn't have a rich daddy. And Mrs. Caroline tried to influence her son in some way, but he only got angry. He was head over heels in love with Mary, insisted on marrying her. With a broken heart, Mrs. Caroline had to accept his choice. She realized that now was not the time to make a scene, or she would lose Daniel. So she put the matter aside, thinking of a more cunning course of action. But she hadn't given up the idea of breaking up the young couple's relationship. She didn't like Mary, and she didn't like her, though there was no objective reason for it. They decided to celebrate the wedding in an expensive restaurant. Many guests were invited from the groom's side. From the bride's side, there was only her mother and a few close friends. Mary prepared everything with her mother, sewed a wonderful dress. She and her beloved made plans for a family, for children to raise. But Mrs. Caroline wanted to test her future daughter-in-law before the wedding, and she'd already thought of a way. She'd learnt that Samantha, the famous fortune teller, had come to town. A lot of people went to her, saying she could tell everything down to the last detail. So Mrs. Caroline wanted her to look into the future to see if her fiancé had any sins, and if they would ever live with Daniel. So to speak, to be on the safe side, so as not to throw such a lot of money away on the celebration. Samantha was a person of mystery. Not much was known about her. She changed cities often, never stayed anywhere for long. She looked like an ordinary girl, unremarkable. They say gray mouse about such people. She never asked her clients any questions. She just took the palm of someone else's hand in hers and closed her eyes. Then she'd tell them what she saw. Sometimes she could refuse, but nobody knew why. Who'd understand them? Those psychics. She didn't have a tariff. She said it was a sin. Whatever she could get, she was happy to get. Mrs. Caroline phoned her and arranged to bring her daughter-in-law to the reception on the eve of the wedding. But there were so many clients, Samantha couldn't find the time. Unless it was the day of the wedding. Mrs. Caroline reluctantly agreed. She was eager to find out all about Mary, any secret she was hiding from her son, so she could use it as a bargaining chip. The party was in full swing. The painting, the doves, the photo shoot at the landmarks, and now the feast at the restaurant. Mary looked dazzling in her handmade dress. She really did look like Ariel, the Little Mermaid. Many socialites whispered, where did Caroline manage to find such an interesting outfit for her daughter-in-law? From what designer? Daniel was a little nervous that his fiancée was being discussed, and the men were looking at her with interest. He was naturally jealous, used to having everything his way. His mom taught him that. Since he was a little boy, he'd been taught that his family was special, that he should always be taller, stronger, and able to take everyone under his thumb. And then Mrs. Caroline came up to Mary and whispered something to her, and she got up and went into the back room. She was gone for a long time, so Daniel decided to go after her to see what was wrong. Mary herself was taken aback when her mother-in-law whispered to her that she was expected. She thought it was some kind of contest or surprise, and when she saw the stranger in front of her, she asked in surprise, "Hello, I was told you were waiting for me here. Who are you? Do we know each other?" The guest replied, "My name is Samantha. I'm a fortune teller. Mrs. Caroline invited me here and asked me to read your reacher. She'll be right with you. Would you like to know your future? Give me your hand. I won't stay long. Think of it as a surprise." The surprised bride thought, "Surely this is another quirk of her mother-in-law's. What else can you expect from her? She's brought in some charlatan. But never mind, I don't want to spoil the holiday. Let her read fortunes. I don't care, she won't tell me anything good anyway. It's all rubbish." The girl held out her palm to the fortune teller. The fortune teller covered it with hers and began to speak. "You lost your father early. You grieved for him for a long time. You drowned twice as a child, and now you're afraid to swim. Would you well in your profession, you'll open your own atelier. The newspapers will even write about you. You really love your fiancé and will be very happy in life, just not with him. There will be sorrows, difficulties and obstacles on your way, but you will overcome everything. Remember that." Shocked, Mary Swan thought, how did the fortune teller know all this about her drowning? Even Daniel didn't know anything. So Mrs. Caroline glared at her sister-in-law and questioned the fortune teller. "How will it be happy, but not with my son? Who will it be with then? What does that mean? Does Mary have someone on the side?" But Samantha only smiled enigmatically. "I tell you what I see. Okay, session's over. I'm going to go now. And Mary, congratulations on your wedding. Enjoy it, have fun. It'll all be over soon." Mary was angry. She could see her mother-in-law was on edge. She didn't know what the fortune teller meant. The last thing she needed was a row with Mrs. Caroline. Just then, a panting groom came into the back room. He started dragging Mary, wailing, "Well, where have you been? The pageant is about to start. We're participating. What's going on here anyway?" Samantha saw the guy, screamed and started to faint. She was brought to her senses. Mrs. Caroline felt sorry for herself. "I called that blessed woman on my own head. She'd said a lot of rubbish and fainted. And now what do we do with her?" Samantha came to her senses and pulled a photo out of her purse, handed it to Daniel, and that's when it hit everyone. It was the same man, only completely bald. The fortune teller tried to explain in confused tones. "That's my fiancé, the late Gregory. He looks just like Daniel. What was he, your brother? Do you have a twin brother? Tell me, please, give me your hand. Maybe I'll see something?" Daniel looked at his mum dumbfounded, expecting some kind of explanation. But Mrs. Caroline became furious and started to literally shove the fortune teller out of the way. "You know what? This is too much. Your fiancé is nothing like my son. He's a scarecrow. You don't know anything. Goodbye. I knew there were charlatans among fortune tellers. Mary, why are you standing there? She's already reaching out to your husband. I want her out of here." So Mrs. Caroline pushed so hard that poor Samantha had to leave quickly, almost run away. The wedding was hopelessly spoiled. It left a bad feeling in everyone's mind. Daniel started to question his mom, but she just waved him off and got angry. "Why are you listening to some trashy girl? Her fiancé looks like you. Isn't there enough people in the world who look like you? She hinted about your Mary, that she'd be happy with someone else. Forget it. It was a stupid idea to invite fortune tellers to your wedding. Forget the whole thing and have fun." Mary had that fortune teller's words in her head all the time too, and the story of Daniel's resemblance to her fiancé kept her on her toes. A few days after the wedding, she decided to visit the fortune teller again and talk to her. Samantha was about to leave and packed her suitcase in the hotel room, but when she saw Mary on the doorstep, she smiled. "Good afternoon. I knew you'd come. Can I use your first name? We're about the same age. My real name is Lucy. Samantha is just a fancy alias. I understand you're interested in the details. Have a seat. Well, I'll start at the beginning, just so I'm clear. I'm from far away, from a small village. My mom died early, my grandmother brought me up. All the villagers apparently respected and feared her. She was a sorceress. She could also see fate. Many people turned to her if there was trouble. I got the gift from her. My grandmother prepared me for it from childhood. She said that money should not be taken, only what people give, otherwise the gift would be lost forever. I didn't really believe it until now. And my abilities became apparent for the first time only after the death of my beloved grandmother. A neighbor came to me once, and I took her by the hand and suddenly saw her fate in a vision and read it. I don't understand how it happens. Whether it's a gift or a curse, I don't know either. People treat it differently. Some don't believe it at first, but then, after a while, when everything starts to come true, they call, tell me about it, and thank me. Many call me a charlatan if they hear something they don't want to hear. But visions are not always good. Sometimes you see scary pictures. That's the worst part. How do you tell someone that? Gregory came to me like that once, thought he was cursed. He came from an orphanage, knew nothing about his family or his past. He suffered there, of course, he didn't like to remember. And then, after graduation, trouble came one after another. I realized straight away that there was no curse on him. He was just tired of being alone and confused. What's amazing is that I couldn't see his fate, no matter how hard I tried. It's rare. I told him honestly, because my visions are beyond my control. He didn't take offense. We talked about life. We were attracted to each other. We started seeing each other. We fell in love. Gregory was different, special, despite all the hardships and deprivations. He was not bitter. His soul was light and pure. We rented a flat and started living together. It was like Gregory was born again, and he had wings behind his back. He said I was his mascot. The lucky groom got a good job as an assembler. And that time was the happiest for me. We dreamed of children, thought we had our whole life ahead of us. And then one day it all came crashing down. Gregory died. A blood clot broke. The doctors were all hands on deck. It's rare in young people. I guess it wasn't him. I'm cursed and doomed to loneliness, just like my late grandmother. I spent a long time beating myself up, blaming myself for his death, for not seeing things, for not being able to keep the person dearest to me safe. Since then, I can't find peace in my soul. That's why I move all the time. I guess I'm running away from myself, and I won't have any more relationships, or someone else will get hurt because of me. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I don't usually share details of my personal life with my clients, but suddenly I just wanted someone to talk to. I was stunned when your fiancé walked in during our session. I'm convinced there's no such thing as stranger to strangers. Mary shook her head, sympathizing with Samantha and not understanding. What a thing. We complain about our lives sometimes. This is what you've been through. What's wrong with that? Why can't you see your destiny? You could have avoided a lot of problems and misfortunes. It's not fair. Samantha replied sadly. Unfortunately, I can't see my destiny. Alas, not only that, my gift is also my heavy cross. It's like I'm paying for what I do. I suggest you find out if your fiancé had a sibling. I could see in his mother's eyes how scared and panicked she was. She threw a temper tantrum and threw me out. But she obviously knows something and she's hiding the truth. I'm sorry, Mary. I've got a taxi waiting for me. I wish you well. Goodbye. Mary's had a moment of realization. Wait, Samantha. You still haven't told me what you meant when you said I'd be very happy, but not with Daniel. I think about it all the time. The fortune teller became serious. Forgive me, Mary, for making a mess of your life. You'll soon find out for yourself and you'll understand without my prompting. When you meet your soulmate. And so they said goodbye. Mary still had more questions than answers. She arrived home still impressed by her conversation with Samantha. She barely waited for her husband to come home from work, fed him dinner and started talking. Listen, honey, I've been wondering about that thing with your possible brother. What do you think about it? I mean, the guy in the picture looks just like you. Don't you want to know if it's true or not? What if it's really your brother? It's just a matter of time, isn't it? You're doing that again, aren't you? No, I'm not interested. I asked Mom, she swears I'm her only child and I can't have a brother. I believe her. And let's end this conversation. But the wife wouldn't let it go. Well, as you know, it's up to you, of course. But personally, I would still get to the truth. It's easy to check these days. Take your mom's hair and your own to the lab. Get a genetic test. So you'll be sure you're not adopted? Daniel flared up, threw his fork on the floor, and jumped up from his chair. What are you talking about? What do you think I am, some kind of foundling? My mom didn't just love me when I was a kid, she adored me. I think you're getting a little carried away, Mary. Think what you're saying. I'm not going to check up on my mom. That's crazy. Don't you have anything better to do? It was the first time the newlyweds had ever fought so hard. But Mary didn't know how to stay angry for long. She was the first to apologize. Decided it was really none of her business. Daniel didn't want to know anything about himself, so he didn't have to. But it wasn't really like that. Her husband thought about it all the time, too. Mary literally voiced his thoughts. He found it humiliating to go behind his mother's back to do genetic testing. So he decided to talk to her again. He went to her house and asked her some uncomfortable questions. "Mom, tell me, who is my father? You never told me about him. Where are your maternity photos? Everyone has them, but we don't." She looked at the album and asked, "Who took you from there? Your grandparents? In which maternity hospital did you give birth to me? I'm not a little kid anymore, and I have a right to know." Mrs. Caroline shuddered like a blow. She jumped up, brought the birth certificate to her son, and began to reprimand him. "Read it. You're my own son, and I'm your mother. What else do you want to know? Your father was not a good man, and he was married. He had no intention of having children on the side. Our affair was short-lived. I made the decision to have the baby myself. He has another family. What's there to talk about? I love you more than my life. When you were sick when you were a baby, I went crazy. I was at your bedside. And you asked me such humiliating questions again. God, why did I invite that fortune teller? She talked rubbish, and you believed her." Daniel was embarrassed, so he backed off. "I'm sorry, Mom. I love you too, and I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just that Mary and I had a big fight last night. She suggested a DNA test between you and me to see if we're related. And I don't want to, 'cause I'm sure you're my birth mom." So I scolded her. She apologized for a long time, promised she'd never bring it up again. "So I thought I'd ask you about your father, just in case." Mrs. Caroline was seething inside. She wanted to say something about her daughter-in-law, but she restrained herself and answered quietly. It was right to scold her. There was no need for her to poke her nose into our family and dig into other people's past. Better let her look after the house and keep the household. Keep her busy so she doesn't have time to do anything stupid. Does she feed you properly at least? You're used to good food. The man smiled. "It's all right, Mum. Mary's a good cook. The flat is clean. The shirts are always ironed. Everything's good with us. All right, I'll run along. We're going along to a concert tonight." Mrs. Caroline saw her son off and clenched her fists. She told Andrew's lover everything and wailed. "Darling, I've got to get rid of that nosy girl at all costs. I didn't like her from the start. I'm not going to let anyone dig into my past and ruin my relationship with my son." Andrew pulled Mrs. Caroline to him, deftly laid her on the huge bed and whispered, "Sunshine, I love it when you're angry. You look like a beautiful, graceful kitty who's let her claws out. What a problem. Your son is terribly jealous. Even I've noticed, he nearly went crazy at his own wedding. Wouldn't let his wife leave his side for a minute. We'll play it like that. I've got it all worked out. You'll love it. Now, come here. You need to relax now." Andrew kissed her passionately, and Mrs. Caroline melted. In his skillful hands, she became like wax and had no control over herself. Together with her lover, the mother-in-law devised a plan to get her daughter-in-law out of the way quickly and safely, and to stay out of the way. That afternoon, Daniel left for a weekend business trip. Mary was saddened. She thought they would spend it together, but there was nothing to do. Work is work. Her husband left, having taken a promise from his wife that she would wait for him, and that she would not go anywhere without him except to her mother's house. Mary sighed and agreed. Truth be told, her husband's jealousy and his difficult character made her very upset and no longer seemed romantic. Daniel demanded that everything in the family be the way he wanted and was used to, and Mary had to adjust to him. Immediately after the wedding, Mary's girlfriends came over to congratulate her and chat a little. But Daniel was very unhappy and quickly drove them out. He also told his wife that now she is a married lady and should give all her time only to him. Mary did not like it at all. She was a girl sociable and not used to sit in four walls. And she didn't like the rigid control. She loved Daniel. At the same time, he was gentle, affectionate, generous. But the moment she disobeyed him or began to object, His mood changed very abruptly. Mary put up with it for the time being. She didn't want to spoil family life. She hoped that in time Daniel would calm down and trust her and let her go everywhere. She didn't tell her mother about their quarrels either, not wanting to upset her, though a bad feeling began to build up in her soul. They'd only been together a month, and they'd already had so many fights. Daniel left. It was almost dark. The weather had turned bad. There was a thunderstorm outside the window, lightning, rain pounding on the windows and drumming hard. Mary felt a little sad and decided to drink cocoa and read her favorite book. But no sooner had she settled into her chair than someone began to knock desperately on the window. Her and her husband's flat was on the ground floor. Mary jumped with surprise. She was scared. She carefully pulled back the blinds and looked out. Outside the window stood a tramp in a Macintosh. He was soaking wet, water streaming down his face. He was young for his age. He looked at Mary, and she was struck by his eyes, deep and sad, though there was a plea for help in them. The man began to ask, "Excuse me, please, can I use your phone? I don't have a phone, and my friend needs help very much. I won't be long, in your presence." Mary hesitated. She felt sorry for the tramp, so she let him into the corridor of the empty flat next door. She didn't risk going into the flat. She took out her mobile phone and held it out. "Call me, just not for long." The man, however, quickly spoke to someone and began to thank her. "Thank you, dear girl. You just saved me. I'm leaving. Sorry again." Mary closed the door, settled back in the soft armchair, began to read, but still could not concentrate. She looked out the window again. The tramp was still sitting doomed on the bench, with water trickling down his back. Mary's heart trembled. What on earth is this nonsense? Can't I let a man warm himself? He'll get sick. It's freezing outside. I don't know what his circumstances are. Maybe something happened. She knocked on the window and waved to the tramp to come in. He came to the window in surprise. "Am I disturbing you? I'll be right out. I'm sorry." But Mary tried to persuade him. "No, you're not." I opened the door. "Come into the entrance to get warm. I'll give you some dry clothes to wear later. Why are you sitting out in the rain? You'll catch cold." The tramp gladly agreed, stomped in the corridor and said, No, I won't go into the flat. I'll get everything dirty there. It's embarrassing. My name is Matthew. I'm not a maniac, I'm not a thief, I'm not a murderer. I just happen to be on the street, and I'm a fool. I'm so embarrassed to embarrass you." The girl handed him dry clothes, Daniel's old tracksuit, and introduced herself. "I'm Mary. Stop apologizing, really. Here are your things. Change here, at least wait out the weather. I'll bring you some hot tea. My husband's away on business. I miss him anyway, so let's talk about life." So Mary left so as not to embarrass the poor man and give him a chance to change. Then she heard shouting and swearing. It was clearly her Daniel. Before the girl could understand anything, her husband burst into the flat, holding the half-dressed tramp by the scruff of the neck and yelling, "So this is how you miss me. You've already brought a lover, you shameless bitch. What's the matter, Mary?" "There's nothing to say." "Daniel, you're back? It's so good. Don't shout. And listen, it's not what you think. This man, he just asked for a phone call, and then I called him myself. I felt sorry for him. It's raining. I gave him some clothes to change into. I realize it's an awkward situation." My husband's eyes bulged, and he shook the poor man. "Awkward, you say? You think it's awkward to cheat on your husband? What are you lying about? You're making it up as you go along. Get the both of you out of my flat. We're getting a divorce. Disgraceful. Sleeping with some bum. My mother told me you were unreliable. She warned me. I didn't believe her." The tramp tried to stand up for his mistress and explain the situation. Mary was sobbing, and the whole thing seemed like a delusion. But Daniel was just insane. Within 10 minutes, Mary and the stranger were thrown out in disgrace. Moreover, the neighbors jumped at the noise and shook their heads disapprovingly, thinking that the husband was right and his wife was unfaithful. The rain had stopped. Mary walked wherever she was going and sobbed. Her life, her family, it all fell apart in an instant. Suddenly she was angry with Matthew. "Why are you bothering me? Get out of here. Where the hell did you come from?" You're the reason my husband left me. I don't know what's going on. My husband left on a business trip. He called me from the airport. How did he get home? And you knocked on my window for some reason. Why did I let you in? I felt sorry for you." Matthew suddenly stopped and told the truth. "I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're right. It was all set up. I was paid handsomely by a woman who asked me to call her Mrs. Caroline. Said it was a simple job, just to make you feel sorry for me. Any excuse to ask you into your flat. I saw you, realized the woman was up to no good, and I couldn't. I left. And then you called me yourself. But I didn't know what it was all about. It was stupid. I just really needed the money. My dog Penny was sick, and I was the only one who could help her. I wanted to make some money so I could take her to Taka. I realize you're not interested in any of this. I set you up. I'm sorry if you can, but do you want me to go back and try and tell your husband? I mean, it never happened, and it never could have happened." Mary sat down on the wet bench and sobbed bitterly. "I don't want anything. It's all clear now. I recognize my mother-in-law's dastardly tricks. She's been trying to bring me down from the start. And now she's done it. You don't know Daniel. He's a jealous man, and he's never let me go anywhere. Only to my mum's. So he won't listen to you or me. He believes everything. He even discouraged my girlfriends from visiting us." Matthew whistled. "Wow, that's some housekeeping. It's none of my business, of course. But did you like that kind of life? It seems to me that if you love someone, you trust them completely. That's the way it is. I'm sorry again. You must hate me, and rightly so. What are you going to do now? Do you want to come to my caravan? I work in the warehouse as a loader, unofficially. I live on the premises. The bosses say it's okay." Mary shook her head no. "No, thanks. I'm going to Mom's house. We live on Maple Street." I can imagine her shock. How embarrassing. Oh, Mummy. And so they went their separate ways. Mary didn't know how to look her mother in the eye. It was nighttime, and here she was. But Vanessa understood everything when she saw her crying, grief-stricken daughter on the doorstep. She didn't torture her with questions, hugged her, let her cry, made her drink a sedative, and whispered, "Well, that's it, my good girl. You've cried, and that's enough. Let's go to sleep. The morning is wiser in the evening. You'll tell me all about it later, if you want to. Anyway, you're home, safe, and I'm here for you." Mary was so grateful to her mum, took a shower and rolled around in bed for a long time, thinking about what had happened. In the morning, she couldn't stand it and told her mum everything. Who else was there to share it with? She just needed to talk. Her daughter was furious. "I hate that Matthew. It's all because of him. He agreed to take part in a dastardly scam and ruin my life. Daniel will never forgive me now. What am I going to do, Mom? It's not my fault, and my husband thinks I'm unfaithful." Vanessa sighed. "Oh, daughter, you're not quite right. Matthew was a mess, of course, but at least he was honest about it. Not everyone can do that. You say yourself he did nothing wrong. You just wanted to keep the tramp warm. So why do you feel so bad about it? Why do you feel guilty? Yes, it was a misunderstanding, but that's all it was. Daniel, if he loves you, he'll cool down and come back for you. He'll make up, talk calmly, and if not, think about it. Does he love you? Is it possible to break off all relations so easily with the person you love without sorting it out? Even the fact that he kicked you out of the house like a naughty kitten in bad weather says a lot. And don't blame Matthew, and don't be too hard on him. Think of it as a test of you and Daniel's love. And he failed. The husband never called. So Mary made up her mind. She dialed her lover's number. She wanted to talk to him calmly, explain everything to him. He picked up the phone and immediately blurted out, "What do you want? I've already filed for divorce. We have nothing to share. Don't call here again. Do you understand?" Mary couldn't believe it and tried to get through to her husband. "Daniel, are you crazy? I didn't do anything. Matthew was hired by your mother. She set the whole thing up." So there was laughter on the phone. "Maybe so, but you didn't have to sleep with him. You were quick with him. I wasn't home at 4 o'clock, and he's already wearing my tracksuit. You're a scoundrel, and there's no forgiveness. I don't want to hear anything. You've disgraced me. I wasted all that money on a wedding." Mary suddenly got so angry, she screamed, "Fuck you. I'm not going to make excuses for something I didn't do. Divorce is divorce." She threw the phone down and burst into tears. Her mom consoled her as best she could. All these days, the woman saw some guy with a sick dog sitting on the bench outside their house every night, long into the night. One day, she couldn't stand it any longer and called her daughter. "Mary, do you know who that is? He doesn't look like he's from our house. He's been sitting there like a glued man for days, and the dog is sick with him, weak as a fiddle. He keeps holding her in his arms and stroking her, whispering something to her. It's pitiful to look at them." The girl looked closely and gasped. "It was Matthew, the tramp, who had caused all the trouble. I told him we lived on Maple Street, didn't I? So he's been sitting here. He's probably going to apologize again, as if that would make me feel better." Vanessa shook her head. "You can't do that, daughter. Matthew's not really to blame. What did he do? He asked for a phone call, that's all. Has he done anything to offend you personally? Why don't you ask him to join us for dinner? I want to talk to him myself. And the doggy needs help. It's an animal that's suffering." Mary reluctantly went out into the yard and approached the tramp. "Hi, you want something? Don't tell me you're just passing through. Is that your dog? What's wrong with it?" "Hi, it's so good to see you. I'm not gonna lie. I was looking for you myself. I don't know why. I can't forget your eyes, that's all. I'm ready to apologize every day. I've regretted 100 times that I agreed to be a part of this. And I feel so bad. My dog, Pappy, she's really sick. I took her to the clinic, but I only had enough money for a couple of drips and a consultation. They say it's a medical emergency, and I don't get paid until 2 weeks from today, and I don't think I'll have enough. It's a shame. I can't bear to see her suffer." Mary's heart trembled, and she said, "Come with me. Mom's inviting you to dinner, and Pappy, stop apologizing. If Daniel loved me, he wouldn't leave me. Full stop." Vanessa welcomed the guest with borscht and cabbage pie. Matthew ate greedily, with appetite, and praised his hostess. "Oh, it's delicious. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in so long. Thank you for your hospitality. Oh, and Zuza ate a little. That's good. Don't think I'm being cheeky. I'll leave soon. I won't bother you." Vanessa stared at Matthew and asked him in the forehead, "Tell me honestly, why did you end up on the street? My daughter says you have no documents. You live in a caravan. How did it happen?" Matthew sighed heavily and began to tell. "It's all my own fault, nobody else's. I grew up in a good family. I didn't need anything. Then it was like everyone else, the Army, university. My parents wanted me to get a good profession, to make it in the world. But I got mixed up with a bad crowd. All I did was skip lectures, make jokes, spend my father's money at night. Eventually I was expelled. I had a huge fight with my parents. Dad said he didn't have a son anymore. I decided I could do it on my own, so I came here to this town. Friends called, said the job was easy, in an underground casino. It was easy money at first. I got intoxicated by it. They corrupted me quickly. I got addicted to booze. Even tried illegal substance a couple of times. And then the casino closed, and I miraculously didn't go to jail, and I was out of business again. And I went downhill from there, ruined my health, got an ulcer. I lost my papers drunkenly. I work as a loader in a warehouse and live there. The housing and conditions aren't very good, that's for sure. So when I had money, girls would hang themselves, and I made friends right away. But if there's no money, nobody needs you. I've realized everything now. I'm trying to get my passport back. I don't drink anymore, but loneliness gnaws at me. I look at people with longing. Everyone's fussing, families, children, and I'm like an outcast." Mary sighed, and Vanessa said, "Good for you for not lying. I thought you'd be telling fairy tales and pitying me. I'm glad you've got your wits about you. I can see you're not a bad guy. Tell you what, you can stay with us. If Mary doesn't mind. We're a bit of a tight squeeze. I think it'll be easier for you to start a new life with a family. I'm very fond of dogs. I'll help you take Pappy to the vet tomorrow. We'll treat her. Who's going to help her if not us?" Matthew couldn't believe what he was hearing. His parents never accepted him, kicked him out of the house, and some kind woman wants to take him in. He looked at the women and asked timidly, "I'd be happy to live with you. but if I'm unpleasant, I'll leave at once. I realize how guilty I am in front of her. And she says, so it will be. The good girl's heart beat more and more. She liked Matthew more and more. Unlike arrogant Daniel, he was a simple, good guy. He spoke honestly to his heart's content. And she nodded in agreement. And so they all began to live together. So Mary helped the man get new documents and get a proper job as a security guard at the firm. They talked a lot. Their relationship became warmer and warmer. It became clear that the young people have a budding love. Vanessa saw all this, of course, and was happy for her daughter. She liked Matthew. He took such a touching care of her daughter, was not lazy, took on all the men's work around the house. His hands were golden. After a difficult relationship with Daniel and a difficult divorce, Mary now felt incredibly relieved. There was no need to adjust and please her fiancé. No need to worry about jealousy outbursts or his bad moods. Matthew was a completely different person. He was cool with Mary's friends and never jealous. Pappy was nursed back to health. She became everyone's favorite and played with all the household. She got better and a coat shone. Now Mary and Matthew enjoyed a walk in the park every day after work. She was so funny chasing the ball, wagging her tail. After the scandal and the divorce, Mrs. Caroline was elated. Her plan had worked. To stop her son doing anything stupid, she set him up with the daughter of a rich man she knew, Katie. And she'd gone to great lengths to get them married. Daniel himself didn't know if he loved Katie, but he decided to drive a wedge and got married despite his ex-wife. Let her bite her elbows. He was very angry with Mary, especially when he learned that she was not grieving either, but had dragged that tramp into the house and had an affair with him. But now, after the wedding, it was as if he'd switched places with Mary. Katie was willful, hot-tempered, and very resentful. Whenever she called her powerful father and complained about her husband, the latter threatened and forced Daniel to indulge his wife's every whim. It pissed Daniel off. He was used to being in charge, and here he had to be constantly adjusted. As it turned out, Katie was completely inept at housekeeping, and she didn't need to cook. They ordered food from a restaurant, hired cleaners to do the cleaning. In fact, she had no interest in household chores at all. Moreover, she continued to have fun with her friends. She could even come home in the morning. This marriage was just for appearances, to keep her father calm. Daniel felt trapped. He realized he'd made a mistake marrying Katie. He was frantic, but he couldn't see a way out. Matthew had once accompanied his boss to an important meeting as a security guard and saved his life. He had quickly dispersed 3 hooligans who had attacked the chief right outside his house. In gratitude, Mr. Samuel Smith promoted him. Matthew was now head of security. He also took him and his girlfriend out to dinner. So Mary was so pleased that Matthew took her along, and they went out to visit. It was a pleasant evening, lots of food, and the drinks were exquisite. In the midst of their conversation, Matthew popped the question. Mary and I want children very much, for without them a family is incomplete. You must have raised yours a long time ago. The businessman suddenly became sad and serious. He began to tell me, "You asked a difficult question, Matthew. A very difficult question. The fact is, many years ago, my wife gave birth to twin boys. We named them Daniel and Gregory. We loved them so much. We couldn't get enough of them. But work took up most of our time, so we hired a nanny. It was a fatal mistake. And our kids were 6 months old when they disappeared without a trace, along with the nanny. Believe me, I had the whole town on alert. And nothing, no sign of them. I don't know anything about my sons, whether they're alive or dead." Mary felt sick to her stomach. She was feverish. She began to speak at once. "Mr. Smith, don't think me crazy, but I'm going to tell you something. You can decide whether they're your children or not." And she told me about her ex-husband Daniel's twin brother. The names matched and the ages matched. Mr. Smith couldn't believe it. He thanked Mary for the information and grasped at it like a straw. He decided to do his own investigation. He called in some private detectives. He managed to get a hair on Mrs. Caroline, Daniel, and Mr. Smith himself. And that's when the shocking truth came to light. It turned out that Mrs. Caroline was not Daniel's birth mother, but Mr. Smith was definitely his birth father. The businessman couldn't believe it. With such irrefutable proof, he went straight to the Pattison mansion. Mr. Smith didn't beat around the bush and went straight ahead. "You got me, Pattison. Did you steal my sons? Read this, and read it carefully. Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined my life. I will destroy you. I'll crush you like a bug. Where's my son? I want to see him." Mrs. Caroline was very frightened. There was nothing to say, especially as Mr. Smith was a very powerful man in town. She'd be in trouble anyway. The woman decided to repent. "Don't shout like that. I'll tell you everything. Yes, I stole the children. Not by myself, of course. I had to pay the nanny very generously for it. I wanted to break you and Iris and take over your business, but it didn't work out the way I planned. As soon as I held Daniel in my arms, I was hooked on him. But I don't know how it happened. And the other boy, Gregory, he got really sick. I was so scared. I couldn't go to the hospital with him. I'd be found out. I wanted to bring him back, but I knew I was taking a big risk. So I thought of nothing better than to take him to another city and put him in a shelter. I hoped they'd help him there, and I kept Daniel. That cost me a lot of money too. But as you know, everything has a price. It's just a question of how much. No one I knew suspected a thing. I was overweight at the time, on hormones, hoping to get pregnant. Don't think I love Daniel more than life itself. He's like family to me. I've done everything for him." Mr. Samuel Smith felt sick to his stomach and clutched at his heart. The sharp pain in his chest made it hard to breathe. He couldn't understand how he could take someone else's child and drop the other one off at the orphanage, knowing that the children's parents were grief-stricken. It started a commotion. An ambulance crew arrived and the businessman was taken to hospital with a heart attack. Mrs. Caroline was terrified and ran to her son, confessing and begging. "Daniel, please save me. Go to your father at the hospital and try to make him feel better. Samuel's promised to destroy me and take revenge. He'll take everything from me. I know he will. Please protect your mother. I love you, my son, and I'm very afraid." The man was just as shocked and screamed. "Protect your mother? Do you realize what you're saying?" So the psychic was right. And Mary was right to tell me to get a genetic test. Didn't I ask you if I had a brother? And you lied to my face again. Not only that, but you denigrated my fiancé. You're the one who broke us up. Why? How could you do such an inhuman thing? You ruined that family's life. You made people suffer. And now you're begging for mercy. Go away. I can't see you now. You've condemned me to misery. Or rather, I did it to myself. I believe Mary was cheating on me. So I married Katie, so what? We're strangers to her. We don't love each other. I'm not happy with her. Are you happy? You've worked so hard for this. You're a soulless monster." Daniel was on his way to his father's room, and he was very excited. He dreamed of this for years, asked his mother about it 1,000 times, but he couldn't even imagine that the woman who raised him was also a stranger to him. So he'd been deceived all his life. He could have grown up with his own parents. That thought was killing him now. When Daniel walked in, Samuel couldn't contain his emotions, for he was a carbon copy of him when he was younger. They hugged each other and just stayed silent. And it was so heartfelt, so sincere. And then they couldn't talk for a long time. Samuel poured his heart out to his son and couldn't get enough of him. The son, too, would not leave his father's bedside, caring for him touchingly and telling him all about his life. Samuel listened and shook his head. "Caroline's done a lot of damage. She's ruined everyone's life. I wish your own mom had lived to see this day. She died pining for her children. Now up there in heaven, hopefully she'll meet Gregory. We need to find that psychic, find out where Gregory's grave is. Visit him, put up a memorial. My poor son. Going around the orphanages thinking his parents had abandoned him, that no one wanted him. It's a good thing I found you. Thanks to Mary. If she hadn't told me, I wouldn't have met you for the rest of my life. She's a very nice woman. She's happy. She's living well with Matthew, dreaming of children. And you've pushed love away from you. You should at least apologize to her. Oh well, we'll make up for it now. We'll talk a lot. If you want, come and visit me or move in with me. And remember, if you're unhappily married, don't torture yourself or your spouse. And I'm very angry with Caroline. I'm not going to leave her alone. She must answer for what she's done. Even though the statute of limitations on her offense is long past. I'll punish her myself. I'll leave her penniless. I'll grind her to dust." Daniel was angry with his mother, but he didn't back his father. Don't, Dad. Please don't hurt her. Revenge won't solve anything. You can't bring Gregory back, just like you can't turn back time. You're right. I'll break up with Katie and move in with you, if that's all right with you, and I'll cut all ties with Mom. When I can't see her and forgive her yet, I'm not ready for that. Life has punished her already, and it will punish her again. Mother has nothing but business. Her young lover only pulls money out of her. He doesn't love her and never has, and he's cheating on her. I know that for a fact. Let her live as she pleases, as long as she's away from us. You'll get better soon, Papa. I'm so glad we met. When Daniel divorced Katie, they were both relieved and parted peacefully, even remained friends. The man realized that he still loved Mary, that he had ruined everything, so he decided to meet her. The conversation was long and difficult. Daniel spoke in complete sincerity. Mary, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I really believe that you cheated on me. That night I was overcome with jealousy. Married Katie to make you angry. Sweetheart, darling, I know how much you love me. I'll never meet anyone else like you. Please give me another chance. I still get jealous when I think of you with someone else. Mary was crying not so long ago. She would have given anything to hear such words from her ex-husband and would have rushed to him without hesitation. But now everything had changed forever. She became a different woman herself, wiped away her tears, and began to speak softly. You're right, Daniel. I've loved you madly, tried to please you in every way. I put up with your jealousy and your bad moods, and you didn't love me at all. You loved yourself. Admit it. If your feelings were genuine, you'd trust me and you'd never believe this ridiculousness. It's too late to change. It's only with Matthew that I realized what true love is. It's quiet, discreet, not showy. It's care, patience, respect for the person you love. I'm happy with Matthew. I'm sorry. And I'm so glad you have a daddy. I hope you meet a soulmate along the way. To be happy, Daniel. And goodbye. It's been a long time since then. Mr. Samuel Smith decided to thank Mary in his own way. He helped her and her mum open their own atelier. The business quickly took off. Mary realized her dream. She made dresses for the ladies of the house. She knew how to dress a woman in such a way as to emphasize all her virtues and hide her flaws as much as possible. There was no shortage of customers. The businessman also found Samantha. She showed him Gregory's grave. And then they kept in touch and became best friends. Mr. Samuel Smith persuaded the fortune teller to move in and settle down. Lucy, look, I didn't get to raise a son, unfortunately, and I'm so bitter about it. But you're the woman my son loved, so you're not a stranger to me. I can see that you're running away from yourself, and I understand you as well as anyone. Stay with me, you'll live like a daughter. Things will get better, you'll see. Loneliness cripples a man. It makes the soul wither and grow old. Let me stay with you and take care of you. I'd like that very much. Lucy was moved to tears and agreed. She was so tired of wandering around the towns and villages. She wanted warmth and comfort. At first they were just friends with Daniel, but his resemblance to his brother did its work. The fortune teller fell in love with him. And the boy had finally found the one he'd probably been subconsciously looking for all his life. He wasn't jealous anymore. It was so easy, so peaceful. But Caroline's fate was a sad one. Her son could not forgive her completely. He rarely visited her. They almost stopped talking to each other. The business went under, and after the ruin of a young lover immediately, without any regrets, she left her without any regrets, and even managed to leave with nothing. The mansion had to be sold, as there was no money for its maintenance. The woman completely neglected herself. There was so much sadness in her soul. Perhaps she only now fully realized what she had done so many years ago. Caroline even tried drinking, but that didn't help either. All her friends were gone. There was nothing around but emptiness. The woman wandered aimlessly around the city, often going to the cemetery to Iris's grave, crying and begging her forgiveness for taking her children away from her. And surprisingly, Mary and Matthew and Daniel and Lucy became family friends. Resentments were a thing of the past, so now they often gathered at Mr. Samuel Smith's mansion. They joked, talked, shared their sorrows and joys as one big family. The master sat at the head of the table and admired the young people, and his heart felt so warm. At last his house was alive, buzzing with voices, filled with freshness and laughter. What happiness! The sun bunny was bouncing around the rooms as if winking. After accidentally seeing his ex-fiancée at a wedding, Ajay decided to humiliate her once again. But Ajay walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating in his chest like a bird in a cage. The smallest multicolored blots flashed before his eyes. The man's breathing was ragged, but he hardly felt it. Rather to be away from the restaurant, where such a surprise awaited him. After all, this trip was going to be pleasant, easy. Edward's childhood friend had invited EJ to the wedding. The man was surprised. He had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. And here it was, a wedding. EJ was curious to see the woman who had conquered his free-spirited comrade. To meet his youthful friends again, to see his hometown, to remember the past. Of course, EJ could not refuse such an opportunity, at least some bright and warm event in a series of gray everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work for this meeting with old friends. Ajay was a more than successful man, but how much he had accomplished, living and working in a big city, managed to escape from a provincial town. They don't know that EJ has been working for many years on an ordinary position in not the most successful company, and every day spends at least 4 hours to get to and from work, because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the city, in a far from prestigious neighborhood. His cramped 2-bedroom apartment has been in need of renovation for a long time. But EJ doesn't want to start this epic. Why should he? It will do. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. Why would a single bachelor need all this beauty? And he needs a lot of money. A man can't afford to pay a lot of money for repairs. His salary is not that absolutely beggarly, but excesses and luxury certainly does not assume. With a personal life also somehow does not add up. There are, of course, sometimes some romances, but it's not serious. Mostly ladies who have nowhere to live flock to Ajay. At his expense, they want to save on rent for the first time, until they get a foothold in the city. Ajay can see the intentions of these women. It's readable in their looks, their words, their actions. Unpleasant, of course, but perhaps by the age of 35, it is time to finally realize that pure, bright love does not exist. Everyone in a relationship pursues their own goals and interests. It seemed in my youth that someday I would meet the perfect girl. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere, certainly household and caring, like a mother and grandmother. On the one hand, self-sufficient, able to occupy herself while her husband is out with friends. On the other hand, adoring her husband and ready to be his reliable rear. It is with her, with this smiling beauty, EJ and build a family. And they will live happily ever after. Remembering those dreams, the man was amazed at how stupid and naive he was. There are no such women, there are no such relationships. And in general, there is no such thing that in life you are completely satisfied with everything. This realization came gradually. Disappointments were waiting at every step: work, personal life, everyday life. How many plans and hopes did AJ have for the big city? When he was young, it seemed to him that he should leave his hometown and settle in the capital, and life would be brightly colored. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, nightclubs, fun parties, new friends. That's not how it works. A small 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, cramped, in an old house and remote from civilization area. But even for these chalates, Ajay still hasn't paid off. The family, of course, helped with the down payment, and helped well. With this amount of money, EJ could buy a huge apartment in his hometown and make luxurious repairs there. But in the big city, it was only a fraction of the cost of a dilapidated apartment on the top floor of a 5-story building. Ajay was not discouraged. Then he was still full of plans and hopes and felt happy. Finally breaking out, that's exactly how the guy felt. Now everything would go right. Freedom strengthened the prospects, made his head spin. Ajay was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. Ajay left his mom, grandparents, friends, and Lexi behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was starting to take a turn for the overly serious. It was scaring AJ. She was certainly a good girl, pretty modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings scared the guy. And anyway, how many more of these years did he have ahead of him? Not to take her with him to the big city, in Tula with his samovar do not go. In the end, Ajay quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as he had imagined at home. Nevertheless, EJ was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. Besides, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere. Everything is still ahead of him, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. EJ still worked at low-paying jobs. You need connections or talent to move up the ladder. Then there's the incredible work ethic, the love of work, the passion. Ajay had none of those things. He served his working hours in the office as a duty, received a salary at the end of the month, most of which he gave to mandatory payments, rent, loans, mortgage. The rest he stretched until the next paycheck. EJ always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long, slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were many of them in the big city, of course, but they were not attracted to AJ at all. How could a young beauty be attracted by a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? In his own town, Ajay had once been an enviable groom, grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. There the boy felt like the best of the best. He had a lot of friends, girls were looking at him. But Ajay always dreamed of more. He dreamed of New York, believed that he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his native Jackson. EJ often spoke contemptuously of life in the provinces, calling his small homeland a backwater and a hole. He said he'd never stay here, but he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? And there's no going back. First of all, AJ, during the years of his life in the capital, has managed to acquire debts in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off. And the salary in New York is still much higher than in Jackson. EJ realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt. And there's no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be in business. A respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved vacation. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how can it is possible to return after EJ assured his friends that life in the slums is not for him? After the contemptuous words in the address of the small motherland, okay, let's be honest, bragging to his friends, to admit to the whole city his failure and inadequacy, to sign in his own insignificance. But no, Ajay couldn't do that, especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives. Ajay was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in New York in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks, he exhibited photos that, in his opinion, supported the status of a prosperous New Yorker. Funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the company, where he worked, EJ, organized for employees' corporate parties. And on EJ's page after such festivities appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once, a colleague of EJ came to work in an expensive foreign car, rented a used car from his brother. EJ took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo on his profile that evening. Ajay laughed at himself. And yet, so on and on it went. Ajay was giving the appearance of a life on his page that he never had. And he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from Jackson. They were convinced that EJ had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come to fruition, and EJ was fine with that. At least in the minds of his friends and relatives, he would be so successful and happy. Ajay grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she took a whore. EJ was the fruit of a banal resort romance of a student, a high school student, and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who his father really was, Ajay didn't know, and believed that now he would never know. The man didn't even know his son existed and had probably forgotten about the affair that had happened so many years ago. Or maybe he was gone altogether. It's not a big deal. Mother, she knew nothing about her resort lover. It's just that her mother didn't plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she repeatedly learned the details of his life. Address and passport data certainly did not ask. Just wanted to have fun, being away from controlling and tutelage strict parents. And in the end, that's how it turned out. Ajay was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth after all, though she seemed to want an abortion at first. Ajay suspected that it was his grandfather who had kept him alive. Grandfather is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped with himself and even made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he raised 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the younger one made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, finally gave birth to a boy. E.J.'s childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, did not pay much attention to her son. She was working or trying to organize her personal life. But E.J. still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a people pleaser, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents, they did not give a damn. Ajay later realized that his grandmother was very sorry for him. After all, how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother is not particularly engaged with him. He would appear like a ray of light and then disappear again. Therefore, the grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth grandson and cooked for him delicious dishes and bedtime stories he read, and walked with his grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around with him all the playgrounds. A grandmother is warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what Ajay did, she was always at his side. Even if her favorite grandchild turned out to be guilty of something. If EJ was involved in a fight, grandmother unreservedly considered the other party as a scumbag bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If her grandson got a D, grandma would turn on the teacher for her prejudice. Ajay loved his grandmother too. It was nice to know that there was someone in the world for whom you were the light in the window, the best, most beautiful, and smartest. EJ had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling, could shout at his grandson, and even spank him when his wife wailed. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically made EJ feel safe. Grandfather was as dependable as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, life plans. Grandfather had been having such conversations with AJ, his boy, since he was a young boy. EJ adored these moments with his grandfather, and the grandfather often took his grandson with him to work. There the boy saw the respect with which other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. EJ realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People were grateful to him. The grandfather took his grandson fishing and to the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, figuring out the insides of his grandfather's old car. Ajay suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. EJ adored his grandfather, and as a child he dreamed of being like him. When EJ was about 6 years old, he saw a famous rock band on TV for the first time, and the boy was so mesmerized by this spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with the plastic shovel. He held it like a guitar and sang and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Ajay would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first, the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has hearing and voice, and took him to a music school. Within these walls, EJ was disappointed. He had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the kid was put at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Ajay hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. But grandmother, always soft and supple, suddenly showed firmness. She was determined to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured her that the boy had talent and that E.J.'s sense of rhythm was innate. It turned out that his ear is amazing. But laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. His grandmother did not want to ruin Ajay's talent, so she made him go to the hated music school for 3 years. And then the boy still dropped out, and not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted his action for a long time. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on posters announcing the arrival of the great pianist. But EJ was not like that at all stagey. The wise grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real, beautiful guitar for the new year. And EJ somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies, something he looked up from his favorite performers, to what he reached himself. And he studied hard with self-tutorials. The boy was happy. He liked this kind of study without annoying instructions, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room, selecting compositions. And it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. A bear stepped on everyone's ear in our family. But this one is a talent. You can see it in him, EJ. Liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the popular rock stars of the time. And he found it. He managed to find it. At school, EJ studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother at first dreamed that he would follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way. And the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that EJ would become a student of an economic university. Why the profession is promising, monetary, just the right thing for a guy. EJ didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. Economist as an economist sounded good. It was better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to EJ something like a never-ending holiday, a party. New friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. EJ liked it at the university. There seemed to be less control right away. It seemed that all his relatives suddenly recognized his only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. It was beautiful. Everything was exactly as EJ had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. EJ, the guitarist, was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls started to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, EJ was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at university he suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. One day, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by EJ was in a rock bar. The guy had no idea that there was such an institution in Houston. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians. On the walls, a long stand with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the halls. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition. Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single coherent organism. EJ immediately wanted to become a part of it. It was the very element he dreamed of plunging into. From then on, EJ became a regular at the bar. He watched the musicians' performances with bated breath and then applauded them so that his palms burned. The guy sang along with the soloists, sometimes even dancing. That's how it goes. Gradually, EJ became his own man in the bar. He got to know the musicians. Sometimes they even let him on stage between acts. EJ played for the bar patrons and felt a wave of energy coming from the audience. It was great. The guy was trying to be part of a band. He'd met a lot of people here now. To play concerts as a member of a rock band, this was E.J.'s dream since his early years, but there were no offers of cooperation. And when EJ tried to offer his services, he was rejected very carefully and gently, trying not to offend. EJ lacked something to realize his dream. Maybe charisma? Maybe charisma? Maybe talent, or both? He had to put up with it, but rock musicians were still idols and celestials for the guy. He liked to rotate in this environment, to listen to their conversations, to help them with performances. It was in this rock bar that AJ met Lexi. He still remembered that night. It was the end of May, time for university credits. AJ, as always, was having a hard time getting out of the trouble he'd gotten himself into. By habit, the guy did not spend the whole semester studying, and on the eve of the session he realized that he had to learn something, pay for something, and work off some credits. Like today, the teacher of economic theory agreed to give the negligent student admission to the session if he would repair his classroom. Ajay spent the whole day on this alone. His legs and back ached from the unusual physical work, but now he had the teacher's signature on his transcript. Ajay decided to visit his favorite rock bar after a hard day. Ajay showed up at the rock bar alone. The buddies were all busy. Someone went on a date with a girl because it was Friday, and someone was diligently preparing for another credit. No problem. Ajay had a lot of acquaintances in the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. And indeed, before he entered, he was already called by Andrew, a regular here. He was sitting with a couple of friends in the corner of the room at a table. Ajay gladly joined them. Joking, talking about life-friendly conversation was going along until Lexi appeared in the room. The short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform, black short shorts, a black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail. There was a minimum of makeup on her face, but this girl didn't need it. Nature herself painted her face with bright colors, black eyebrows, long black eyelashes, beautiful peachy skin, and huge eyes of some unreal light turquoise color. This unusual combination of colors attracted EJ's attention. "And this is a new waitress. She just started her first shift yesterday," said Andrew, following his friend's gaze. "Cute. I agree, but I like Janie better. Too bad she quit." Ajay nodded absent-mindedly at Andrew's words. All his attention was on the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what attracted him to her. Well, yes, pretty, but at the university he met prettier girls. This one was too skinny. Edward used to say, nothing to hold on to, but Ajay couldn't take his eyes off her. Then he realized. He was captivated by her smile, dazzling and yet modest and warm. It seemed to light up the girl's face, making it even more attractive. EJ wanted to see that smile all the time. Moreover, the guy dreamed of being the one who caused it, this smile. It was a strange feeling. It had never happened to him before. They were silent at first, and it wasn't a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Lexi nor Ajay felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then all of a sudden, both of them were talking. First, they discussed the previous night and the performance of a local rock band made up of yesterday's high school students. Lexi and AJ agreed that the guys had a great future ahead of them if they kept it up. Finally, Ajay ventured into a more candid conversation. "What about you? Do you have someone in your life?" "No, I'm single." Lexi quickly replied, "What about you?" Ajay couldn't answer that question unequivocally. He always had someone. Right now he was kind of dating Katie, a girl from the parallel group. They had gone on a couple dates already, but for Lexi's sake he would easily give up all the others. This girl was attracting him more and more. Ajay asked the girl to tell him about herself. He wanted to know more about this mysterious beauty who made such a strong impression on him. Ajay was experiencing previously unexplored feelings. It was both gratifying and confusing. Lexi talked about her life simply and sincerely. Ajay listened attentively, eagerly catching every word she said. Her manner of speech, her calm, gentle timbre, her facial expressions, he liked everything about this girl, absolutely everything. He didn't want to part with her at all. He hoped that the road to her house would be very long. It turned out that Lexi was born and raised in the countryside. Her ancestral home is almost 100 kilometers from Haxton. It's a cozy and quiet place, but completely unsuited for the life of young people, like most of her friends' buddies. Lexi, having finished 9 grades, went to seek happiness in the nearest city. The girl entered a teacher's college. The profession of a teacher of junior high school, she chose it not on the dictates of the heart, just somewhere it was necessary to enter. The girl studied, got a diploma, but she could not work in her profession. She ran away after a couple of months of employment. "I realized that pedagogy is not my thing," Lexi admitted. Lexi shared her memories. I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays. I know how to do it all perfectly well myself, but I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It is one thing to study in college, and another thing to practice. It's heaven and earth. I did not want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children go, to discourage their desire to learn, and I quit. Then I worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young, pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail. And I myself have always liked to mess around with kids. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. I found myself on the street. I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar, so I answered it. "I'm so glad your center closed," Ajay said. "I mean, if it wasn't for that, we never would have met." Ajay and Lexi started dating. The quiet, modest Lexi, with her dazzling smile and short stare, finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, Ajay, saw it, felt it, sensed it. Lexi loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make Ajay feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. Ajay moved into Lexi's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. Ajay's relatives weren't too happy about this fact. But what could they do? Ajay was a very mature guy. What he wanted to do, he did. Ajay was finishing up his degree at the university. Lexi was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives, the young people had enough money. Ajay was resting his soul next to Lexi. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing them, paradoxically, as pluses. What eyes did Lexi look at him with? With what attention she caught his every word. And how many compliments EJ received when he played guitar for his girlfriend or sang to her. Next to Lexi, Ajay felt like someone incredibly needed, important, successful, almost perfect. It felt really good. And then AJ didn't understand why, but everything started to change. Not at once, slowly, gradually. At first, Lexi's concerns stopped warming his soul. Ajay had somehow gotten used to her adoration and attention. Lexi made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And it came out that the guy started to take it all for granted. Lexi no longer evoked the same feelings in him. The admiration, the interest, it was all gone. At first, Lexi seemed a mystery to Ajay, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But the eyes gave away a bright nature, an exciting combination. But over time, the guy found out that there was nothing special about Lexi, an ordinary girl, even a little boring. And Ajay had always been attracted to unconventional personalities. He feared mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Andrew Kalin. He was 10 years older than AJ. By the way, at one time Andrew graduated from the same school where EJ studied. But to enter the vocational school, where most of those who failed, in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There, Kalin made a dizzying career. No, he did not become a star of the first magnitude, but still gained some fame. Songs of his rock band played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts across the country and even had their own army of fans. Kalin possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. Ajay knew him personally. Andrew often visited Ajay's house. His parents lived here. And every time he came to the rock bar, where he was always a dear guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Kalin, everyone here knew him and loved him. Ajay considered himself a fan of his in general. He liked everything about the man, his open smile, his way of talking, his firm gaze. Kalin had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. It seemed that Andrew saw through every person with those eyes. EJ wanted to be like Andrew. He even tried to imitate him, but quickly realized that he could not. Kalin was a peace product, a star, a soloist, a leader. It was Lexi's shift that night. EJ had also stopped by the bar to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of people he knew, the newcomers were showing promise. The evening went on as usual. Toward midnight, Ajay suddenly felt some excitement. Turning around, he saw him, Kalin, in the company of several buddies. Andrew was walking to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. Ajay rejoiced. What a stroke of luck. There would definitely be no boredom here tonight. Kalin was a man of celebration, and EJ would be sure to socialize with him this evening. only later, when the time is right. In the back of his mind, the boy still cherished the hope that Andrew would someday help him get him on stage or put in a good word for him. He's a powerful man, after all. He has so many connections, so many acquaintances. Maybe Kalen will even get him in his band someday, even if not in the main squad, just as a backup. Andrew lived exactly the life that Ajay dreamed of: tours, performances, rehearsals, parties, communication with interesting people, beautiful girls, and most importantly, the stage. Andrew gathered stadiums, turned on crowds of people. He sang along. Thousands of eyes looked at him with admiration. Isn't that happiness? Ajay seemed to have realized by the last year of university that he would not make a rock musician. And it's probably too late to start at that age. But seeing Andrew, the guy every time again remembered his dream. In his soul awoke hope. Andrew, he's a risk taker. After school did not go to study further, put everything on the career of a musician. And he didn't fail. It's a pity that Ajay did not have the courage for such a step. Back in the day, Colin's table was served by Lexi. She smiled at Andrew, as she did at all the customers. He would look at her, and occasionally say a word or two to Lexi. Ajay didn't hear those phrases, but judging by the look on Lexi's face, it was something pleasant. To his surprise, Ajay suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend being nice to Andrew. And this was clearly not about jealousy. No, Ajay realized that Kalen was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want to hick Lexi? Yeah, hick. Now that he'd been living with her for a few months, Ajay could see that there was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't know what it was about her that had gotten to him back then. Ajay was uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't the one chatting sweetly with the star. He has to patiently wait for the right moment. And Lexi is quietly talking to Andrew right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she doesn't realize who's in front of her. Or maybe she really doesn't. A few more hours passed. Ajay decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Lexi rushed over to Kalen with her order, and she swooped her tray at Ajay. No, Lexi held the glasses with beer. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation. But Ajay still couldn't resist an irritated retort. An elephant in a china shop, the expression came out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail out on Ajay when he dropped or broke something. Lexi was embarrassed. She felt bad that Ajay was emphasizing her slip-up to those present. If it wasn't for his caustic remarks, no one would have noticed anything. Well, why would you do that, Lexi? Kalen smiled encouragingly. What kind of elephant is it? It's a very sweet and fragile young lady. Ajay looked angrily at Lexi. After those words from Andrew, she suddenly irritated him even more. The girl, sensing this, retreated. The rest of the evening went great. Ajay had a great time in the company of Andrew and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What kind of trouble did they get into in their time? A whole movie could be made. Ajay liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Lexi's shift was over. She walked over to Ajay, calling him home. Usually they always came home from the bar together. He just waved her off. He wasn't interested in her right now. Is that your girlfriend? Andrew asked. More like a groupie, Ajay answered without caring about Lexi's feelings. And she was standing right next to him and heard everything. But the guy didn't care at the time. He didn't want Kalen to find out that Ajay was in a serious relationship with a hick and a waitress. You're lucky. I wish I had a groupie like that, Andrew said, winking at Lexi. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Ajay showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Lexi for a few months now. Early in the morning, he thought Lexi was going to give him a scandal. Well, or at least demand an explanation. Still, he'd been very naughty to her. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to the others that she was his girlfriend. But Lexi looked kind of guilty herself. She hadn't said a word to Ajay, and then when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. Looking at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and caring for him as well. Lexi's admiration and attention, which used to be seen as a gift of fate, now irritated Ajay. What had recently seemed to be the girl's virtues had turned into her flaws. Not care, but obsession. Not natural beauty, but provincial simplicity. Not modesty, but stiffness. And yet, Ajay was in no hurry to part with Lexi. She was comfortable with Ajay. Lexi provided him with a place to live, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And yet she didn't control his every move like his relatives did. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his mind with talk about the future. With her, Ajay lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But Ajay dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established New Yorker. A bright girl with a model appearance, not Lexi from the province, should be next to such a person. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university, to move finally to the capital and start a new life. He didn't see Lexi around him. She was just a stopover, nothing more. But Ajay's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. "We need to have a serious talk," those were the words Lexi had used to greet Ajay from the university one day. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Consequently, he had neither the energy nor the desire to talk to the girl, but she showed an uncharacteristic persistence. Okay, Ajay sighed. He realized that he had no way out. "I'm expecting a baby." Lexi lowered her gaze. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. Ajay felt like he'd been splashed with cold water. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "What's there to understand? It's simple. I'm expecting a baby." "Are you sure about that?" Ajay asked with hope in his voice. "It can't be any more certain than that." "That's a twist. What about New York? What about AJ's plans and dreams?" Now it's all over. AJ tried to talk Lexi into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're almost kids. "I'm not ready," the kid was honest. "What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet." "I get it," Lexi sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry. I'll raise him on my own." The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? AJ knew full well that Lexi couldn't handle it. Likewise, Ajay knew he wouldn't leave her now, or rather he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known of his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. Grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into EJ's head a simple rule: you cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It is the gravest sin a man can commit. And now EJ finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his dad, EJ won't be able to disappear into the vast expanse of his immense homeland, and he won't be able to escape the consequences. No, of course Lexi won't go after him. She's not lying when she says she's going to raise the baby alone. But Ajay's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. "Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding." Ajay sighed and forced a semblance of a smile. "Well, I guess we'll just have to adapt to the new circumstances." Come to think of it, Lexi wasn't the only one to blame for this situation. He, Ajay, had a part in it as well. Lexi is certainly not the limit of his dreams, but she's a good person to live with. She's homemaker, quiet, caring. She'd probably be a good mom, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. Ajay's going to get his way. The boy honestly tried to cheer himself up with those thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce and realize the old plans. True, you'll have to pay alimony for 18 years, but that's no problem. EJ would have such an income that these obligatory deductions would not do him any good. Lexi hugged Ajay, snuggled up to him. "I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted," she said. Before, Lexi's confession might have filled Ajay with energy and joy, but now she seemed like an obstacle, a stone around his neck, a problem. So he remained silent. Ajay introduced Lexi to his relatives. How could he not? The wedding was coming up. She won their hearts right away. Her grandmother was especially excited. She tirelessly praised her grandson's bride and said that AJ was lucky to meet such a girl. Preparations for the wedding began. Lexi looked so happy, so excited. Her cheerful look annoyed AJ, and talking about the upcoming celebration pissed him off. Everyone around him was rejoicing, but he felt like a trapped animal. All his plans had gone to shit because of her, because of Lexi. Here it is, the long-awaited and cherished diploma in his pocket already. The defense was perfect. Now would be a good time to get on a plane and go to New York, start a new life. And here it was, the wedding, Lexi's glowing face, the baby. Lexi was still working at the bar. Ajay, on the other hand, decided to take a vacation after a tough finish line. First credits, then exams, then a diploma. He would have time to work on it. There are times ahead when Lexi will be on maternity leave and he, Ajay, will have to support his family. So he was entitled to a little rest before this race. More and more often now, Ajay went to the rock bar to sit with his friends and have a beer or two. He looked with envious eyes at the young and not so young musicians performing on the stage. Some of them would stay in this small godforsaken town. Some of them had a great future ahead of them. Looking at these people, EJ began to realize that he had done wrong with his life. A man is born and lives only once. He has no time for the unlove that goes for people and things. But commitments held Ajay like a snare. He wanted to howl at the moon at such a life and prospects. His friends had no idea. They thought that AJ was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's just a normal thing. But AJ didn't try to dissuade them. He was suffering alone and desperately hoped that things could still catch up. Not now, but later in a couple years. His plans weren't overturned, just put on hold for the time being, just so long as this swamp didn't swallow him up. One such night at the bar, when Lexi was staying home and AJ was enjoying some freedom, he met Janie, a tall, dazzlingly beautiful girl. Long hair in loose waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing a flat stomach. Top. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were pretty girls too, but all their virtues paled in comparison to Janie's beauty. Ajay hadn't taken his eyes off her from the moment she entered the hall. He wasn't the only one. By the way, his friends had already left, and AJ was still sitting at the table, sipping his beer and watching. He liked everything about her, her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Janie was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general she behaved like a leader in life. She caught Ajay's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already dispersed by then. Two silent girls remained, who did not interfere in any way with the conversation between Janie and EJ. In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young people had a lot in common. Janie was a couple years younger than EJ, and had also been raised without a father. Her grandmother and mother insisted that the girl should go to the law school of the local university after school. And Janie herself, as long as she could remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life. "You're really going to be a great actress," Ajay assured her sincerely. "With such a stunning appearance. Yes, for you directors will arrange fights." "Thank you." Janie smiled without embarrassment. "I think so too, but I wasn't ready to argue with my mother and grandmother at that age. Not like I am now. At first I listened to my older relatives, and then, as I got older and stronger, I said I was an adult, and I wouldn't let them manipulate me and control my life anymore," Janie said. "Anyway, today I withdrew my documents from the university. I'm not going back. In a couple of days I'll take the train and go to New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here." Ajay looked at the girl with admiration. How wonderful she was. Janie, unlike him, did not betray her dream, despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to leave the university and go to New York into the unknown. In that, she's like the heroine of the movie. And Janie is bound to win, with such looks, character, and assertiveness. Next to this girl, Ajay suddenly seemed worthless and cowardly. But it didn't last long, because Janie suddenly kissed Ajay. He was dizzy with surprise. Was this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him? "You're awesome," Janie informed EJ, pulling back a little. Her huge brown eyes were like two dark pools in which one could so easily drown. "Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. You're feeling a little cramped in this city, too. It'll be easier on the two of us." Ajay was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful companion. She felt him so subtly, understood everything about him at once. "It's amazing." Yes, of course, he nodded. "I'm with you." As he said it, Ajay honestly thought he could handle Lexi in the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Maybe Ajay would never meet someone like that again. For sure. Because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, Ajay left the rock bar with Janie. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Janie drove the car admirably beautifully. Ajay admired her confident movements and slim profile the whole way. Then they were outside of town, in some deserted field. A desolate place. Janie turned off the engine, turned to Ajay, smiled. But how could she resist? They greeted the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the unfolded seats. At that moment, Ajay had no doubt that he would break up with Lexi. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would be no wedding. It wasn't easy telling Lexi the truth. But Ajay wasn't going to cheat either. Why would he do that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. It happens. After all, he wasn't Lexi's property. He was a free man who was free to do with his life as he pleased. But Lexi looked at Ajay with those eyes. There was hope and adoration, love and tenderness in them. It was hard to tell the truth when looking into those devoted eyes. Ajay felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he bluntly shared the news with his now ex-fiancée. "Lexi," he began. She flinched. It was as if Ajay's words had caused her physical pain. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Janie at all. Beautiful girl. You're young. I get it. It's a fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway." Ajay felt his anger boiling up inside him. This girl doesn't understand anything. He wants to go to New York to start a new life. The one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. He didn't need the burden of an obsessive Lexi and a baby. Lexi cried, begged, apologized. Ajay never realized why. The guy was angry, insulting the girl, trying to hurt her as much as possible. He realized that he was being cruel to Lexi, but his angry words were his way of trying to break the connection with the annoying girl, to push her away from him. And she was really starting to annoy Ajay a lot, pissing him off like never before. Ajay reminded Lexi of her country roots, her not always literate speech and narrow-mindedness. He accused his ex-fiancée of lacking ambition, calling her a dumb peasant, a burden. Lexi nodded in response to all these insults, agreed and promised to change. Another woman in her place would have gotten angry, started insulting her unfaithful fiancé back. But she clung to Ajay with all her might and was willing to forgive him absolutely anything. It even felt a little good. Next to Lexi, Ajay felt like a prize, almost a deity. See how she was fighting for him. The guy realized that by humiliating the girl he was trampling her, but he couldn't stop. He was getting revenge on Lexi for causing him so much trouble, and he was also asserting himself. Eventually, Ajay left Lexi's apartment, slamming the door. At that moment, he felt light and free. No, of course, the kid wasn't going anywhere. He'd have to pay child support. Maybe even socialize with him. Ajay didn't want to be as mythical a character in the eyes of his own son or daughter as his own father. Of course, he wouldn't keep the child. He would be an occasional presence in his life, and of course provide for him. This little man will eventually realize everything, and will be proud of his successful, determined father. Ajay decided to dispense with explanations with his relatives. Things would hardly go as smoothly here as they had with Lexi. He'd call later and tell them everything. When he gets there, he'll leave a note. And by the way, ask them to keep an eye on Lexi and the baby. No matter how hard he tried, Ajay couldn't get the baby out of his thoughts. He already felt responsible for this little life. The 24 hours before leaving, Ajay stayed with his buddy Edward and then the train station. Janie's shining eyes, heading off to her new life with only a light backpack. A long road trip behind her. Ajay withdrew all his savings. His grandfather set aside a tidy sum for his grandson EJ to save each year. It was, he said, the startup capital that every man needs. Now this money came in very handy. EJ used it to rent an apartment for him and Janie. They lived on it for the first time, until they found a job. Grandfather, grandmother, mother, they were always trying to call AJ. Probably wanted to tell their son and grandson that they resented what he'd done. Thought they could influence him, maybe even bring him home. But the kid dropped those calls. He explained everything to them in a letter, and to talk to his relatives until they cooled down, had not the slightest desire. And then time would pass, things would settle down. Ajay will find a job. To get a job in the capital, he will have something to please his own. That's when they'll talk. Until then, it wasn't time. Janie thought AJ was doing the right thing. Older relatives are often the ones who drag us down without realizing it, she said thoughtfully. When AJ dropped the call from his mother again, I thought, they're trying to force us into their own boxes, trying to make the kids live by their own rules. But we're not their property, and we don't have to organize our lives to please them. We are individuals, adults. Ajay agreed with every word Janie said. True, they hadn't been together long. The young beauty had quickly found a wealthy patron in the capital and had gone to him without a second thought. Ajay felt abandoned, humiliated, lost. He felt almost physically hurt by the girl's betrayal. He thought he had finally met his soulmate. Janie understood him like no one else, and he agreed with every word she said. It was a rare thing. It seemed like the two of them could do it together, to conquer New York shoulder to shoulder, and now it's happening. But the boy couldn't suffer for long. He had to find a new place to live, look for a better paying job. Going back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searches, EJ finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in the staff of a not too successful, but obviously reliable company. It seemed to the guy that this was just the beginning, the start of his way to a successful, prosperous life. But more than 10 years passed, and still there. EJ still worked at a not the most prestigious position. He had barely moved up the career ladder, and he didn't have any prospects. Then, after getting a good job, the guy called his mother. He was ready for a serious conversation. Yes, of course, the mother will shout, accuse her son, maybe even demand that he return. But the parent surprised Ajay. How could you do this to us, to Lexi? That question, the reproach, was quite expected. The boy remained silent, letting his mother blow off steam. But her next phrase made an incredible impression on him. Lexi was so worried about your betrayal that she lost her baby. She ended up in the hospital, barely saved. We called you to tell you Lexi was in the NICU. And you never answered? Ajay was digesting the news. Oddly enough, he was hurt at the thought of the baby being gone. In theory, a guy should be happy the problem had solved itself. But he felt a mixture of pain, disappointment, and unspeakable longing. Did AJ get over it? Of course he had. Now it was even easier to turn the page and start his life over. Ajay worked hard, with prospects, saving money. His whole life consisted of reports and traveling from the office to home and back. No partying, no bright new acquaintances, and certainly no beautiful girls. Ajay had completely abandoned his guitar. It was now gathering dust in a corner, unneeded. There was no time to play, no mood. After a couple of years, EJ managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house in the suburbs without repairs, but it was his own. Relatives helped with the first installment. Further, the guy himself then sincerely rejoiced, thought that the beginning was laid. But again, time passed and nothing changed. EJ lived in a tiny two-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work. Pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully built the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. Ajay knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. Ajay's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling. But all these ladies were like one, they had to stay somewhere for the first time. E.J.'s apartment was being used as a staging area. The man was well aware of that, And now he was already thinking of Lexi with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, Ajay felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they always only used Ajay. The man understood it perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Back then, in his youth, it seemed to Ajay that he would have many more like Lexi. Only as the years passed did he realize that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships were rare. Only there was no taking anything back. Ajay was very happy to get a call from his old friend Sam. They had been together since high school and until E.J.'s departure for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things: warm memories, common childhood and youth. All of this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Sam has decided to settle down after all. He has a wedding coming up, and he invites his childhood friend, who now lives in New York, to the celebration. But what a New Yorker will find time in his busy schedule for an old friend? 100 years have not seen each other, and here is such an occasion. This half-joking phrase once again convinced EJ that in his hometown he is considered quite established and happy man. The activity in social networks was not in vain. EJ has never once traveled to his hometown in all these years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather themselves have been to visit him a few times. And AJ? He didn't want to go back for some reason. But now the man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends for whom he is a successful economist from New York, to walk along the streets familiar from his childhood, to visit a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but the capital's successful guest who managed to build a career, to get out of the wilderness. It's so great, isn't it? Of course I will, Sam Ajay replied to his friend. Ajay arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab. He decided to walk. Not much had changed here. Same dusty stretches of highway, same sidewalks, same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares. A strange feeling came over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like all the others, ordinary. They would stay in this city, and he would be something like Andrew Sokolovsky for the people of the city, acquaintance with whom the locals would be proud. It didn't work out. Of course, EJ lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, Ajay would feel like the man he wanted to be when he was younger. That was good. The family greeted his son and grandson with joy and warmth. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather. The older relatives had become quite old, and once they had both seemed energetic, strong-willed, all-powerful. Time spares no one. And Mom is no longer the beautiful young woman she used to be. They're the only people on the whole planet who care about AJ. When they were gone, the man didn't even want to think about the days when he would be all alone. The next day, Ajay met Sam and his fiancée at a coffee shop. At first, AJ was confused by so many strangers. Then his friends responded to him. All of them came to the party with their other halves family, serious people. They all had children, jobs, apartments, cars. Looking at old friends, standing on the arm with their wives, EJ once again felt that his life was passing somehow aimlessly. Solemn wedding, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, and showered the newlyweds with compliments. Edward and Nayli really looked great, beautiful, in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. Ajay was relaxed by then, getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asked about New York, spoke respectfully about EJ's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. At the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the toastmaster, a cheerful, smiling fellow. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. It was here that EJ got a surprise he hadn't expected. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Lexi. At first, the man couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was just a dream. But why would she be here at all? Lexi had changed, of course, but not so much that AJ didn't recognize her. Still the same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Lexi's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Lexi was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald hue that went so well with her eyes. Her hair was nicely pinned up, revealing her beautiful face, and it spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. Ajay could feel it even from a distance. "Is that Lexi?" Ajay turned to Kaylin standing next to her. "What is she doing here?" "Lexi?" Edward invited her, Edward answered. Ajay grinned. Kaylin wasn't helping him much. Lexi noticed him at that moment too. Their eyes met, and Lexi smiled. That beaming smile of hers had a strange effect on Ajay. Ajay didn't even immediately remember what a beautiful, radiant, warm smile Lexi had, illuminating her face with some special light. On the one hand, she charmed him, but on the other hand, the man felt anger rising in his soul. Yes, he was angry at Lexi. For some reason, she was the one he suddenly assigned blame for his life not working out too well. Lexi had been just a clingy girl back then, years ago, annoying and demanding of his attention, unwilling to give him freedom. She was the one who had made him run away to New York when he wasn't quite ready for it. It's all her fault. And now Ajay is forced to live a miserable existence. And Lexi showed up at the wedding so beautiful, clearly successful, confident, and smiling at him now with a sense of superiority. Ajay nodded dryly at Lexi and hurried off into the crowd. But now the celebration was no longer as enjoyable as before. Ajay watched from his seat as Lexi cheered. She talked easily with the guests. Many knew her. She laughed. She danced. Lexi was being asked to dance by the men. The young lady was clearly a success, which is not surprising. But strangely enough, she showed up to the wedding alone. Colin said Edward invited her. Why would she do that? Was it because of him, Ajay? Lexi was clearly enjoying herself, and everything seemed to be going well for her. Her jewelry seemed to be modest, inconspicuous earrings and a thin necklace. But Ajay was well aware of how much it cost a fortune. As were Lexi's shoes from a decidedly not budget brand. Ajay recognized the signature red soles. Lexi didn't look like she lived in her town at all. She looked modest, yet expensive and sophisticated. The local ladies were old-fashioned, preferring to shine at events like weddings, bright makeup, flashy clothes, flashy hairstyles. Lexi stood out to them. And for some reason that pissed Ajay off. He felt like Lexi was looking at everyone with superiority, including himself. Ajay wanted to bring Lexi down to earth, to show her who she really was, a country girl, a former waitress he'd left years ago because he didn't want to commit to a country girl. She shouldn't be acting like a queen here. Ajay is the capital's guest at this wedding, not her. The man was waiting for the right opportunity. And now it presented itself. Lexi, picking up the tray, hurried over to an elderly woman, seemingly the bride's grandmother. She was feeling ill from the heat. Lexi noticed this and rushed into the kitchen. She came back with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Ajay hurried toward his ex-fiancée. He wanted to humiliate her. A suitable phrase was already ripe in his head. Hey, the past just won't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. Those words were meant to remind Lexi of her past, of who she really was. Lexi looked up at Ajay with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused. Just like that, all of her outer gloss had come off. Lexi hadn't changed a bit, and it seemed that Ajay was still a huge influence on her, just like before. Hello to you too, Lexi said quietly. She placed the tray in front of the old lady and stepped back. Ajay, pleased with himself, went to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had succeeded in hurting Lexi. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant anymore. That's great. Ajay asked a young girl, who seemed to be Nayli's niece, to dance. The young lady had been casting amorous glances at the lonely guest from the capital all evening, having fallen under the spell of a supposedly successful man from New York. Young people fall for them nowadays. Ajay decided to take advantage of the impression he made on the girl and asked her to dance. She gladly agreed. The man did it for Lexi's sake, let her see how much fun he was having here and how popular he was. It seemed that Ajay had succeeded in achieving the desired effect. Lexi looked up at him, hugging her young cousin, the bride, in a dance, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for him. It was nice to think so. But it wasn't enough for the man. He wanted others to make fun of Lexi. Why, he didn't understand. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Silly, of course, but that's the way it was. Ajay watched Lexi discreetly, waiting for the right opportunity. And lo and behold, it happened. The girl didn't notice the champagne spilled on the floor and slipped, awkwardly swinging her arms. This moment was seen by many people. Lexi almost fell. At the last moment, she managed to hold on to the column. Someone I hid, someone smiled, and Ajay uttered at the top of his voice. There you go, just like you were an elephant in a china shop. You're still an elephant in a china shop. Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again? Came a suddenly familiar voice. Ajay shifted his gaze from Lexi to the man at her back and couldn't believe his eyes. It was Kalen. He had recently arrived at the restaurant, otherwise Ajay would have noticed his idol. Kalen, keeping his eyes on Ajay, offered his hand to Lexi, helped her up and gave her a familiar hug around the waist. Ajay couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi looked sad at that. The elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then, remember? Ajay nodded, though that moment had been erased from his memory. But since Kalen says so, it must have been. That phrase of yours is how my introduction to this beautiful girl began. Kalen smiled at Lexi. So thank you for that. But don't talk to her like that again, or you'll be dealing with me. Kalen seemed to be joking while saying that sentence, but his eyes were very serious. A stunned Ajay returned to his seat. His lady, his young cousin Naili, sat down next to him and began to chatter something excitedly. But Ajay was not concerned with her. He was looking at Kalen, who was very gently supporting Lexi by the arm. A crowd immediately gathered around them, of course. Edward was there as well. Old acquaintances were drinking, cracking jokes, discussing something cheerfully. But Ajay couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. He was too stunned, lost, confused. I don't understand anything. What's even going on here? He uttered at last. Kalen, what's he doing here? Isn't he a buddy of Edward's? Edward has known him since his youth. Kalen is his idol, replied E.J.'s young companion, and she happily told everything she knew. It turned out that Kalen, who has made a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who didn't want to leave their small homeland, and friends, of course. Kalen kept in touch with Edward and his buddies all this time. They often met at the Rock Bar. Ajay would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. Gradually, an almost friendly relationship developed between them all. Lexi? He met her at the same Rock Bar. The girls shared details. They say she was insulted by some guy right in front of Kalen, and it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her immediately. Kalen fell in love with her, even wrote songs for her. In my opinion, those songs he wrote for Lexi are the most beautiful. But I think she was in love with someone else at the time. Some unhappy love affair she had. That's how I would edit this text. Who can resist Kalen? And this girl was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He'd done something bad to her, dumped her before the wedding, I think. And that's when she was in a terrible state. Naili said Lexi was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but Ajay knew. He knew why Lexi was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She lost her baby, their baby, Edward and Naili told me. Lexi didn't go back to work at the Rock Bar. She went to her family in the country. And Kalen found her, got her address through some acquaintances and went. Kalen himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Ajay was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Kalen went to the Rock Bar every night, hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Lexi from mutual acquaintances. Edward, Sergi, Andrew, all of them, of course, knew about Ajay dumping Lexi before the wedding and moving to LA. The guys didn't judge. They understood their friend. Especially since he wasn't going to give up on the baby. They even supported him. Approved of this deed. Well, everyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Andrew said in a deep voice when he found out Ajay was leaving. Kalen saved Lexi, pulled her out of the depths of despair. Been there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Andrew came to her village every day. Every day E.J.'s young companion exclaimed adorably. But she, it's strange, didn't want to be with him. Is that how it's possible? I can't imagine it. Such a man. And she must have loved that old one of hers, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Kaylin kept visiting her. It's so romantic. So of course Lexi melted. And they've been together ever since. They got married? Ajay saw once in the press about Kaylin's wedding, but there were no photos from the celebration online, and Andrew preferred to keep his private life private. Ajay had no idea that Kaylin's wife was Lexi. Lexi, whom he had run away from years ago, and for whom, apparently, he still had some feelings. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married, said AJ's companion. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a fuss about the event. Everything went quietly, modestly. Then they flew to New York and now live there. They flew here for a couple of days to visit Andrew's parents. Edward found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Lexi got here first. Kaylin had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Aren't they a great couple? Ajay looked at Andrew and Lexi. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Andrew had his arm gently around his spouse's shoulders, and she had her hand on his knee. Idle. They really looked like a harmonious couple, and looked great together. Ajay suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Lexi and look into her eyes. He's the one who wants that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Ajay had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He himself, with his own hands, destroyed his happiness years ago. And now his reality is this: he works for pennies, lives alone. No friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom EJ still sincerely admires. Kaylin considers him a scoundrel. And quite rightly so, by the way. They have kids as if reading his mind. AJ's companion completed the picture of Lexi's current happy life. She had no idea that AJ was the abusive groom who had abandoned his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, it was unlikely she would have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and girl are twins, continued EJ's companion. I've seen them, they're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Ajay felt like a lowlife. At first, he had wanted to make a splash with his acquaintances, to come here as a visitor from Los Angeles. Successful, more successful than his friends in Nashville. At least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he was. And wanting to humiliate Lexi was pathetic and ridiculous, too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood seemed silly, to say the least. Ajay couldn't stand to be here anymore. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick to his stomach. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Ajay felt close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing a wall with his fist, or worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Ajay realized he had to leave silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Kaylin himself was here. It was unlikely anyone would notice his disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, hurry, we must hurry. Hurry to get far away from here. It didn't matter where. It was not a matter of the first importance. And so AJ wandered through the night streets of Nashville. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward downtown. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends. Bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They'd start asking Ajay about what happened, worrying. No, it's better to be outside alone. Ajay would come back later, when the family was tired. The man walked through Nashville wherever he was going. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete non-entity and regretted coming to his friend's wedding. Wait, there's no way I can catch up with you, came a voice from behind him. The man turned around. The same young girl, the bride's cousin, was rushing towards him. What are you doing here? You left so suddenly. I followed you. Your face was strange and very sad. I think she blurted out. Why did you? Why did you follow me? The man wondered. Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you. The man looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could he, so lowly and mean, really like this young creature? To all appearances, the girl was really enchanted by him. Strangely, but it made his soul warm. He realized that all was not yet lost. He's only 35. A whole life was ahead of him, and what kind of life it would be depended only on him. Obviously, he's made a lot of mistakes. But he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself and your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing now: it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at him with hope. In her eyes he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what might happen to a young girl on the street at night. He'll say something encouraging and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, after all, and will leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes. But it's going to work out, it's going to work out, it's going to work out. A mother with many children bought a house in the countryside with her last money and decided to dismantle the stove. Annie took one more look around her parents' apartment and her miserable belongings. What had she prepared for the journey? In the kitchen, the twins, her two favorite sweet couples, Megan and Emily, were finishing their tea and gnawing on one bagel for two. Sweet tooths, Tommy, Christian, Annie said. Another equally ruddy bagel and a bowl of apricot jam stood on the table. A car was due to pick them up in half an hour. There was still time to see if everything was packed for the long journey to her new life, which she did not know how it would turn out. The woman sat down heavily on a small stool in the hallway, sighed, tried to pull her thoughts together so she wouldn't cry. Not to wind snot on her fist. She didn't like weaklings. And here you're going to go. She wanted to sob in her voice to the bone. 30 years down the drain. Childhood, youth, father and mother, her late husband. Did it all happen within the walls of this house? The apartment was dejectedly silent. Only on the landing the old elevator farted like an owl, whether it was taking someone up or taking them down. Annie would never have sold her parents' inheritance if it hadn't been for fateful circumstances. Everything in life must be paid for, including insanely passionate love. That's fate, and billed her now at the full rate. Their home in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Los Angeles got Annie's parents honorably after hard work at the candy factory. The girl's father was an adjuster of production lines. It was thanks to his bright head on the conveyor belt smoothly rolled all these lush cakes, dressed with chocolate icing, beckoned sugar-colored marmalades. To the mother, sweet treasures a little later got to the packaging. The workers put the fragile products into colorful boxes marked "Made in the oldest candy factory in the USA." The soul rejoices without a premium. And if they also give a bonus, so in general, here it is, simple happiness. In stores, the goods flew off the shelves across the country, boxes of products dispersed, giving the staff of the confectionery factory indecent salaries by those standards to receive, and social benefits to enjoy. So the masters of tasty business got this 2-room apartment. They furnished it with new furniture, a sofa, a TV set, a couple of armchairs, a floor lamp, a sideboard, crystal. This is in the living room, and in the bedroom, where the 3 of us slept for a long time, until Annie finally grew up and moved into the hall, put 3 beds. We have girls like the 3 bears in a fairy tale, Dad joked. The biggest bed for Papa Bear, the smaller one for Mama Bear, and the baby for their bear cub. Annie envisioned this picture and burst into a long, happy laugh. At that time, because of her young age, she did not think about why her parents slept in separate beds. There was already an irreversible distress living in the family. But at that time, Annie had little understanding of what was going on. They were endlessly happy. It seemed to the 3 of them that it could not be otherwise. Annie's mother was not allowed to have children in the sense of giving birth on her own. But she wanted a child so badly that she took the risk. Annie was born, and Isabella herself underwent a complicated operation after the birth. They didn't leave anything inside the childbearing chamber. Daddy tolerated for a long time honest wife. Even close relations with her husband were not recommended. and then, as if off the chain, could not miss a single skirt. Hunger flew out of the secret gut, like a cork from a bottle of champagne. Christian had been a model family man before the birth of his daughter, and afterwards he made a conscientious effort not to distance himself from his wife. But the male nature was stronger than all the vows made to himself. The first affair, Christian started on the side, released the genie on the loose. Now he wanted more and more adventures, more emotions and victories. Isabella was not in the clouds. She did not press her lips when she first found traces of lipstick on the collar of her husband's shirt. Isabella didn't faint from the perpetual swarm of feminine odors now always surrounding Christian. When he returned to the home in the late afternoon, it came as no shock to her when she realized her husband had been hit on in earnest by another woman. He even stopped going to the movies in the park with Annie, her daughter. On weekends, he'd come back late at night, spending long hours furiously scrubbing his tracks in the bathroom. Then he could spend hours on the balcony smoking one cigarette after another, agonizing. Isabella knew Christian was making a choice, and she sensed it would not be in her favor. The difficult conversation took place in the midst of spring. Birds were chirping outside the window and lilacs were fragrant in the yard. The fragrance wafted insistently through the open window into the kitchen, where Christian was explaining himself to Isabella. "I've met another woman, and it's stronger than I am. I don't live, I don't breathe, I don't exist if she's not around for even a few hours. I'll pay child support. But I can't go on living in this house, away from my beloved." Christian's things are packed. While Annie was in class, Isabella realized her husband had endured 8 whole years in a cold bed. His manhood was also short. Everything was inevitable from the time when she was made an inferior woman after childbirth. Surprisingly, there were no tears and wailing. She was too tired of feeling guilty, and she also knew something about herself put her again before the choice of having a daughter or a husband. She would choose a daughter again. A couple of months later, Isabella learned that Christian and his new wife had left for a shift in Norilsk. There, their traces were quickly lost under the snowdrifts. It was only 300 kilometers to the Arctic Circle. Christian kept his promise. He transferred the money to Annie accurately and on time. By the first day of each month, Isabella and her daughter were living together. But strangely enough, it was hardly noticed that now there were only girls in the house. Annie unequivocally took her mother's side in the divorce. "Mama, I'll always be there for you," she said seriously, as if she were an adult. "Men sometimes go off to other women. It's their nature." Isabella laughed heartily, hugged her budding daughter, and replied, "Someday, my good one, you will meet your man, your soul mate, and change your ironic attitude to the male sex. We will discuss this topic many times." Isabella was right on the money. Annie went from a little girl at 15 to a total beauty. You can sit down and paint a picture of her now. Light, slender, with big blue eyes, smooth long hair the color of coal anthracite, feminine, early-formed figure. Classmates pelted her with notes with invitations to the movies or disco. But the heart of the young beauty was suddenly occupied. In the next doorway of their house lived a little swagger, but very handsome guy named Robert. The kind of guy that women of all ages turn around and cast languid glances at. Robert was ironic and cocky, superbly built, with a masculine brutality in his demeanor and gaze. What eyes there were seemed not to notice beside him. At the same time, past the female sex, he somehow passed indifferently. Dates did not impose. The thresholds of the house did not dwell. He worked as a lawyer in one of the Moscow law offices, dealt mainly with civil cases. And yet there was something subtly slippery, murky about him. Isabella could not even explain to herself why her heart was so tight when she caught her now 17-year-old daughter on duty at the window. Annie didn't even immediately realize that her mother was already there, and she was also looking at Robert, strolling toward her brand new foreign car. This young man was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. Dad is a diplomat, Mom is a theater actress. His parents were public figures in Moscow. They occupied a whole floor in their house, having bought and renovated 2 adjacent apartments at once. Not housing, but chalets in a quiet green neighborhood of the capital. The woman then thought, God, but why Isabella liked him? There is something about him that makes me suspicious, but I can't understand what it is. Matthew was 10 years older than Isabella. Between them lay a deep chasm of his life experience, his high school diploma, the beginning of his career, and her girlish naivete and purity as a 10th grade graduate. No miracle can happen. And that's great, thought Amelie to herself. He'll never pay attention to a girl. I mean, how many local and foreign girls have been hunting him? All of them have passed him by. He did. He stopped suddenly as Amelie and Annie were running, laden with groceries from the grocery store. He gallantly opened the door for them. He glanced at Isabella appraisingly, hummed something to himself, and the tray girl was stunned by his presence, frozen in front of the steps like a statue, while Amelie almost poked her in the back with her nose. And there's Matthew, that young man from the other Isabella, Amelie thought. Not his type. He'll break her heart. You won't know what hit you. Her daughter was embarrassed, but came to her senses quickly. I love him, Mom. I love him so much that I won't even listen to you this time. If he calls me to follow him anywhere, I'll go. I won't hesitate. These seconds are my choice. You'll have to accept that. A true daughter of her father, Amelie thought immediately. He, too, had fallen madly in love and refused to compromise. At least my inexperienced girl did not get into some unpleasant story with her unearthly love. Well, if fate has decreed so, it is only necessary to tell her that if she gets burned, the door of the house for her is always open. Amelie was pulled out of her memories of what her life with her handsome husband had been like by her daughter. Mom, we cleaned up the kitchen. When is the car coming to pick us up? You said that our new house in the countryside stands almost on the banks of the river, that around a dense forest with hares and squirrels. 86 years have already passed to my Arkarovsky, and all dream of adventures, thought Isabella with love. At least Matthew had left something light behind on this earth. What would I do? How would I live if I didn't have my magnificent foursome? Isabella stroked the curly heads of her older sons, tightened the colored rubber bands on the girls' ponytails, brushed the stockings of the girls with the little comb she always carried in all her pockets. Forward, my young princesses and knights. Great things await us, she said. The minibus she had hired was puffing away in the driveway. She looked back at the home she had lived in for 35 years and stepped boldly onto the step. Today closed a large and poignant page of her life. By evening, they would be in place in their newly purchased home 300 kilometers from Miami. Isabella had sold off all the furniture and utensils, rightly deciding that if she was starting her life from scratch, in a new place, let everything around her also be different, still unexplored. The old apartment all reminded her of the former failures and joys that had also been. And to anger God that she had not had many very happy days in her life, she would not. It would be quite unfair to fate evil. Presents in the form of bright universes of celestial life did send her. Isabella leaned back gracefully on the soft, comfortable back of the seat in the minibus, and again, indulging in memories, the twins chattered about something of their own in the back. For a while, she even forgot about the tragic events of the last 2 years and went back there, far away, to their amazing romance with Matthew. The first guy in their yard was waiting for her at the driveway the very next day, twirling his car keys on his finger and smiling his unimaginable smile. It was for her, Isabella. As she walked away from the driveway, he rushed to the back seat and pulled out a luxurious bouquet of delicate maroon roses with some beautiful pink veins. Your name is Isabella, isn't it, neighbor girl? He touched her hand with his fingers, and Isabella felt as if her skin was burned in that spot. Bella, the girl answered, stammering. And you are? She asked this stupid question, realizing perfectly well that he knew that she knew his name. Matthew smiled his charming smile once more and suddenly proposed. How about I show you my town? The one I'm crazy about. The one I know so well. The one that every other Miami resident sometimes never gets to visit in a lifetime. Isabella swallowed her saliva and answered guiltily. There's no way I can do that right now. I'm going to school for a physics tutorial. We have a final exam in a week. Matthew didn't raise an eyebrow, slipped the impossibly beautiful roses into her hands and replied. Then we'll postpone our date until after your final exams. He jumped into the front seat, deftly squeezing himself between the steering wheel and the back of the car seat. The engine rumbled softly like a contented March cat, and the car disappeared in a flash. Only Isabella remained standing in the yard, agonizingly trying to make a decision to go to the consultation directly with a gorgeous bouquet of roses and be on time, or to return home and put the bouquet in the most expensive vase of sec crystal, but be late. In an argument with myself, the third solution was chosen. Her face was burning like a fire from the surge of impressions and emotions. It was unthinkable to show up at school like this, and there was no one at home right now. Having decided that she would ask her friend about the questions and answers discussed with the teacher at school, Isabella rushed home and spent almost 2 hours alone admiring her first flowers from a man. Then there were so many more dizzying things to come. Matthew did not like to walk around the city on foot, but he drove her around Miami endless times. His behavior was impeccable. He never allowed anything but a light touch of his lips to hers after a farewell meeting. Even when Isabella was sent from the confectionery factory to a sanatorium on a discounted voucher, Matthew did not ask for a visit. So passed their chase meetings until Isabella's 18th birthday. After graduating from high school, Isabella was absorbed by the unexpectedly fell on her first love. With the choice of university, she did not particularly wise went to the University of Miami at the Faculty of Philology. She did not like exact sciences very much, but she loved to read books, all in a row. She thought that the profession of a teacher of literature sounds decent and cultural. And the prestige. What about prestige? She didn't want to be an astronaut, or a mall manager, or a TV hostess. She was fine with that. Matthew was a little ironic about her choice, but then he made a joke. Why are you going to teach our children? Writing essays, speaking nicely, and social behavior are already bred, in a sense. When Isabella heard our children, she opened her eyes wide, and then for the first time she couldn't help herself and threw herself around Matthew's neck. Do you understand what you just said? You said I would teach our children. Was that a joke? Tell me, Matthew, you were joking. The man indulgently put his arm around her and stroked her shoulders. He looked into her eyes, and then he kissed her lips with a long kiss. How long had she waited for this moment? How long had she dreamed of her first adult kiss? And yet she wasn't ready for it. The ground fell away from under her feet, the sky fell to the ground, or was it just her imagination? At that moment, Isabella realized that this man was her personal god, her lord, her master. She would follow him into fire and water. Future events were predetermined. Studying at the university, Isabella suddenly came to her liking. The group gathered soulful, as usual at the women's faculty, long heated arguments about the next classic literary masterpiece, seminars in English, where she learned the basics of literacy. Sometimes Matthew would meet her after class and they would go on exciting trips around the state. During the school year, they visited Key West, Sanibel, Mount Dora. One day they wandered around the Everglades all day and then had a picnic with sandwiches right by the lake. Matthew seemed to Isabella a sophisticated aesthete, immersing her in a world of sweet dreams. A man without flaws, a knight from the old books, pleasing his lady in every possible way. Sometimes he suddenly disappeared for a few days and came back happy, said that there was a business trip, all adrenaline. But it only gave him vigor and strength. After the first year, when Isabella's session was over, Matthew took an envelope out of the glove compartment. Baby, I've got a surprise for you. A trip for two to Venice. You wouldn't mind keeping me company in this exquisite land of canals, would you? While Isabella ran to get her passport photo taken, she and Matthew applied for a Schengen visa. He himself had had a multi-visa for a long time. Annie looked disapprovingly at the whole thing. It's no use, Isabella whispered in her mother's ear. I love him to bits. There is no such thing as so much happiness. In Italy, Isabella was immediately dumbfounded by the beauty. She held Matthew's hand like a mesmerized woman and jumped frightened when dark-skinned people tried to sell Isabella souvenirs and some handbags to passers-by. And St. Mark Square, near the Doge's Palace, Matthew and Isabella spent a long time feeding an army of pigeons, having bought a whole bag of grain for €1. The robber birds tried to peck the provisions right from the palms of their hands. Loving couples clung to both of them from all sides, so some tourist immediately began to take pictures of this scene. Matthew booked a hotel near the house of the legendary Casanova. Was this the reason for the uniqueness of their first night, or was it the Venice air? The first time Isabella was with Matthew, she barely remembered the sweetness, the dreams, the fog, the thrill of falling into the abyss while holding hands. By morning, before falling into slumber, she asked, "Why have I never seen any other women around you? You're a wizard." "I was waiting for you, my enchantress," the man replied. such an inexperienced and trembling girl to lead her down the path to paradise. Isabella remembered the next days in Venice as if in a fog. Coffee and pizza on a cozy summer playground, all on the same Piazza San Marco. Long dinners with a glass of wine. Shopping for gifts for her mother, they bought her a luxurious Venetian mask, decorated with bright red and black feathers and the invariable colored stones. Isabella herself was also bought outfits and jewelry. Matthew spared neither money in boutiques, nor the energy of tenderness at night in their wonderful room. In terms of procreation, the man was careful to use protection. To the mute question in Isabella's eyes, he remarked weightily, "You will teach our children Russian language and literature later. The main thing now is to get your diploma." Isabella changed her position on the seat in the minibus. There were no more than 50 kilometers to the final destination. The children were peacefully dozing in the back. She could go on rehashing the pages of her sweet life with Matthew, but she remembered something else. The shock she'd experienced when she'd learned that her now husband was a gambler. At Matthew's parents' wedding, in the midst of the raucous party, it seemed to Isabella that everyone kept looking at her strangely. The essence of these looks she realized later, after a frank conversation with her mother-in-law. "You don't know yourself, child, what kind of story our Matthew has gotten into with this unearthly love of yours. He's sick. A mad gambler. Like every gambler, he's had his downs and ups. Big winnings alternated with temporary cash fiascos. In parallel, he began studying at the Law Academy, which, contrary to his passion, graduated with a red diploma. Neither the heat of his addiction cooled down, nor did the career that began later, quite successful for a young specialist." Annie breathed a sigh of relief. "And only after he met you. They could not believe their eyes you were able to conquer the heart of our impregnable fortress in male form. In 1929, when all such establishments were noisily shut down, Matthew seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. And then he began to go on imaginary business trips to those unfortunate zones in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and Monaco. He flew there infrequently, came back inspired, but he was increasingly unlucky. One day, my husband Christian discovered that expensive things were disappearing from the house. I was missing some diamond and emerald jewelry from my jewelry box. Christian's conversation with Matthew was stern. His father gave him an ultimatum: either he ends his gambling dalliances or moves out of the house. That's when Matthew announced to us that he was getting married immediately and would live with his wife. Isabella could not believe her ears. All this story, told by the new mother-in-law, could not be true. There was no way her idol, her husband, her Matthew, could be a gambler. They'd been together for years. Except for the occasional business trips, from which he returned enthusiastic, there was no hint of this madness in him. After the wedding, the newlyweds did live with the bride's mother. Matthew didn't say a peep about the conditions, the modest, poor surroundings of the new house. If personal belongings were needed, he'd go to his parents' house and haul huge bags of groceries, delicacies, and high-end drinks. He and Isabella slept in a small bedroom, the former den of the Three Bears, which was now occupied by a huge marital bed. Isabella still forgot everything as soon as her husband closed the door to their bedroom. 6 months later, she realized she was expecting a child, and when the doctor announced at the ultrasound that there would be twins, she was terribly surprised. "My God, Matthew, where did this miracle come from?" Her husband smiled reassuringly at her. "So I have a twin mother. It's a genetic thing. Now we've been blessed with this good fortune." For the first time after the birth of Tom and Tobias, he was the most caring and attentive father. He shared the household chores with her equally, even learned to wash dishes and cook porridge. A year later, Isabella felt uneasy again. She felt sleepy in the evenings. The smell of fried fish made Isabella dizzy. The doctor's verdict: "You're pregnant again." She and Matthew greeted the news with enthusiasm. By then, Matthew's parents had gone abroad on a diplomatic contract. They would not be crowded now. The family decided to move into his parents' apartment next door. Moreover, Amelie had not been feeling well lately. Christian was getting tired of taking care of his grandchildren. He was sneaking pills while the children were out of sight. The power of Matthew's mother's genes was very strong. In due time in the family appeared another twins, this time girls Maggie and Megan. To give credit to Mother Nature, she did not rest on the children of Matthew and Isabella. The kids managed to take from their parents all the most beautiful features. The brothers had blue eyes and black hair like their mother. The sisters had huge eyes the color of milk chocolate and golden curls. Their figures were 1-to-1, modest from their early childhood. Age's sores never clung to this quartet. Their disposition was good-natured, their character mischievous, fond of mischief and invention. But all four were not capricious but genetic. Isabella's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden braking of the bus. "I'm sorry, I almost missed the address you gave me," the little driver apologized. But there was no reason to scold him for it. Redwood Village. All the houses stood far apart, like people sometimes showing urban loneliness. Some man walked past their van, limping, casting a hard, scrutinizing glance at their expedition. "This place isn't friendly," Isabella thought. "I have found the local controller." The things were quickly transferred to the new dwelling, and the children went to inspect the house. Isabella suddenly felt intolerably hungry. She frantically searched through her bags for a bag of bagels while she gnawed on the bread gut. There was a knock at the door, just as the bagel was in her mouth. Isabella went to open the door to the uninvited guests. The same limping man stood on the doorstep, holding a basket. There was a knock on the door and Isabella opened it. On the threshold stood the limping man with the basket. "Good evening, my hosts. My name is Jasper. I'm the village chief," he introduced himself. "You can get the documents for the house with all the seals tomorrow at the village administration. In the meantime, I have brought you milk, sour cream, eggs, fresh bread from our bakery. The store is closed today. You'll need all this from the road. You have children with you." Isabella was a little taken aback. She didn't know anyone at her new place of residence, and here she was welcomed. She accepted the basket of supplies from Jasper's hands. She had so hastily and nervously packed the apartment that they had no supplies except a few bagels and half a jar of frozen apricot jam. Going into the house, Jasper refused. He turned around a little awkwardly on the porch and said one last thing. "The stove in the house is working. I've been checking, and it'll make eggs or scrambled eggs for the boys too." Isabella turned around helplessly from which side to approach the Russian stove. She had no idea. Jasper understood without words. "What's your name, mistress?" "Isabella," the woman answered. "Don't worry, Isabella. I'll show you how to use this machine. It's not difficult." Half an hour later, the stove was crackling cozily with dry wood, which Jasper had cleverly arranged in an intricate arrangement. Eggs were smoldering on the table, and the four young robbers were already spreading sour cream on the bread, drinking warm, steaming milk from mugs Isabella had found in a nearby box. After a hearty supper, the children piled into the far room, where the beds were wide. The woman laid out the bedclothes on the run. She didn't even have time to notice where her assistant had gone. Isabella herself got the bed. It was surprisingly wide and comfortable. When she lay down, she thought she would fall asleep with her head barely touching the pillow. But insidious memories crowded her again. Matthew bored suddenly at half a word, averting his eyes to the side, said, "I have a business trip to Miami, where they are opening a new facility in the village." Isabella, of course, had no idea about her husband's new addiction. Previously, he was only slumbering passion for gambling, but now it flared up, drawing him to the gambling tables of the casino. On a business trip to San Diego, Matthew was in San Diego for a week. He came back elated. He flew in, bought Isabella and the kids presents, said that he received a bonus for successful work, and it did not occur to her that her husband brazenly lied, spending another big winnings. This trip was followed by a series of other trips. Matthew invariably returned glum and gloomy, but Isabella never thought that her luck had turned away from her husband. It came as a thunderclap when it was discovered that Amelie had cancer. The operation was taken to do in Germany, but the German doctors asked for an unaffordable price. Isabella didn't have that kind of money. Matthew refused to help. There were no new orders from clients at work. Where am I going to get that kind of money? Amelie's grip on the disease was deadly. The woman was weakening before her eyes. Isabella tossed between two houses and then could not stand it, asked her mother-in-law for money. They did not refuse. Satisfied with the result of negotiations, She flew to tell Matthew the news. His reaction was strange. "Where did you get this money from? My baby, my girl, my goddess. I'll withdraw the whole amount from the bank myself. Don't ask your parents, you'll find out what a clever girl you are. My treasure, my reward." As luck would have it, all the twins got a viral infection at the same time. They were feverish, cranky, coughing, and snotty. Isabella got all the information from her mother-in-law about the money transfer and sent her husband to the bank. He disappeared for 2 days. He returned home gloomy. He announced on the doorstep, "Isabella, I've been framed. Now I owe serious people a lot of money. I'm leaving New York for a while and I won't even tell you where." Things have gone too far. Matthew couldn't hide from the criminal creditors. A week later, operatives from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived at his parents' apartment. Isabella was invited to identify the body of an unknown man found in the Hudson River. She walked to the morgue as if she were going to an execution, on wobbly legs. A creepy institution with blue, purple, neon lights, rows of shiny metal tables everywhere, on one of which Matthew lay. She recognized him at once. Her heart felt like it had plummeted into an abyss. Beautiful brown eyes were closed. The mole on his neck that she loved so much caught her eye. "Why should I suffer this agony?" her soul screamed. "My beloved, my best, my only, my kin." There were no tears for some reason. It seemed as if everything inside had turned into an icy stone. It wouldn't melt, wouldn't budge. Isabella Machine signed all the necessary papers, dryly asked when her husband's body could be buried. "The investigation is underway. We'll let you know later when the burial can take place." This nightmarish day did not end with the terrible news of her husband's death. Isabella first called Matthew's parents to tell them the tragic news. The father-in-law, even at such a sorrowful moment, could not escape from distant wanderings to his homeland. Matthew's mother could not even speak from grief. She refused to fly over, saying, "I want to remember my boy alive. You there yourself take care of a decent send-off." The end of the chain of fateful events was a sharp deterioration of Amélie's condition. Isabella did not dare to ask her mother-in-law for money again. Mother was put in the hospital. Now she existed only on painkillers. There were many people at Matthew's cremation. Isabella only knew a few of his co-workers. There were 100 of them here. The faces were mostly unfamiliar to her. A close friend of her husband's helped with the funeral. Not so much a friend as a partner in the law business. No matter how she looked at it, her Matthew wasn't the most distinguished professional. Many appropriate speeches were made, and Isabella kept thinking about what the investigator had asked her. Did he have any enemies? She did not know the answer, but she was sure that her husband's death was connected with his addiction to gambling. Isabella did not even ask herself where the large sum of money sent by her husband's parents had gone. Amélie had not lasted long after Matthew's death. With 4 children in her arms, Isabella had no way to get her mother to foreign clinics. And the doctors said the time was irretrievably lost. So Isabella took Amélie's mind back home. Mom had changed a lot, turned into a sickly, lightweight, like a tiny Thumbelina. She had hardly eaten anything for a long time. So a couple of spoonfuls of liquid broth inside her, all organs were affected by a malignant tumor. Every movement was a feat for Amélie. The disease she could not overcome. Even before that, Isabella moved back in with her mother. The huge apartment without Matthew seemed to her like a gloomy crypt. Everything reminded her of him. It was unbearable. After the departure of 2 people very close to her, she lived for a while as if in a vacuum, with the children and the house like a robot. It turned out that Matthew still maintained the family quite well. Because Isabella never became a teacher of Russian language and literature, she was a housewife. Somehow their previous environment became completely unbearable. The walls in the apartment she had once loved pressed on her, and the ceiling seemed low. In the kitchen, the old tulle curtains and curtains with flowers irritated her. She wanted to rip them down and stomp on them. Isabella realized one day that if she didn't move out of this place, her life would remain dull and hopeless. The apartment, though on the outskirts of New York, which had almost become a neighborhood close to the center, cost a lot of money. Isabella had no savings, no inheritance from rich relatives. The decision to sell everything and find a place to live somewhere within 300 kilometers of the city matured rapidly. House in the village. Birchwood realtor, looking for a buyer for her apartment, found quickly. She refused to even go to see it. For some reason, she believed the pictures right away. She was attracted by a rivulet flowing half a kilometer from the future shelter. Isabella liked the pretty forest and the smooth rows of birch trees on its outskirts. The paperwork was done in a matter of days, and there were no delays anywhere. Isabella estimated that the proceeds would be enough for her and her children for the first time, and then she would look for a job as a teacher in the local school or a kindergarten teacher. Communicating with her sons and daughters revealed to her the truth: she loves the kids very sincerely, truly. She is interested in the older kids. If Matthew were alive, she'd have twins and she wouldn't hesitate for a second. Isabella smiled. It brought to mind an incident in Emmett's life, who didn't miss a single living thing in the yard, from the big dogs to the brightly colored ants that lined the path from the manhole to the bushes. The janitor's vain attempts to disperse the industrious insects provoked fierce resistance from Emmett. He made bridges out of cardboard to cover the ant kingdom so no one could step on it. So Isabella belated every stray lesser brother in the neighborhood and offered to pick them up for the neighbors. And then drove Isabella and Matthew to hysterics in general. He walked into their room with a serious look on his face and asked, "Dad, Mom, don't swear, but I have a big favor to ask of you. Please give birth to a kitten from the street. You don't allow me pets. But if you're his parents, he'll be my brother, and you won't kick him out then." Matthew almost fell off the bed at such a suggestion, and Isabella, combing Tobias's curls after bathing, dropped the comb. A serious task must be answered accordingly. So the puzzled mother advised Emmett to go to their neighbor on the landing, Nellie, in the apartment across the hall. She had a gorgeous Siberian cat named Grinny for some reason. Isabella assured Emmett that Grinny's cat could be useful to him in giving birth to a kitten. Nellie worked in the trauma room of the district hospital and part-time treated all the injuries of the children in their yard. Nellie opened the door to Emmett, who had come on an important mission. Then she discussed something with him for a long time. Emmett returned home with 4 small chocolates for all his siblings and the overwhelming news. "Granny can't give birth to a kitten for me because he's a man. We men can't give birth. Also, there was a surgical invasion of his privacy, so he can't be a father to my kitten." After giving out this information, Emmett even sweated from the exertion. But he never asked Isabella and Matthew to give birth to a kitten again. It was too complicated for his notion. Isabella also thought of a funny story about her girl neighbors. That year, the playground was being renovated. The wooden slide was covered in brush. Workers had not yet had time to put a metal flat surface underneath. But had that ever stopped anyone? Maggie and Megan rolled dashingly down the rough surface, despite the danger. Megan was lucky. Maggie immediately caught a huge brush right in her soft spot. Whole delegations came to nail a crying Maggie, Isabella, and a terrified Megan in the tail. The operation lasted 2 minutes. When a sliver at least 3 centimeters long was extracted from Maggie's 5th point, Megan finally exhaled. "Mom, Aunt Nellie. Now I know what the very thing looks like." The trauma neighbor and Isabella lay on the floor, laughing. They didn't have the energy to talk. Yes, there had been many good things in her life. It was only the last 2 years that had been incredibly difficult and tragic. Things were going to get better now. Jasper walked toward his house, where the cat scratching at his heart. Being in the company of 4 boys who were so vigorous at once made him sad. The healthy shoulders of an experienced, outwardly stern and unapproachable man with kind, pure eyes would never admit to anyone that he loved children. Except that he himself to become a father by the age of 40 years with a tail never happened. Everything in this life was connected with children, remained for Jasper tragic and painful. After 2004, when Jasper together with the guys from his unit freed people in the Beastland tragedy, he came to North Ossetia by chance together with his friend Tobias, with whom he had already participated in more than one operation side by side and studied together at the Academy of Civil Service, where he was in the epicenter of the struggle for justice and a bright future. Jasper had dreamed of this since he was young, even as a child. His parents were desperate people, bikers, obsessed with motorcycles, which at that time in the USSR were not easy to get. His father was fond of heavy rock, even named his son in honor of the first letters of the Scottish rock band. He strokes the side of his iron friend, puts on a protective helmet, turns on the music, sits behind the faithful companion, and rushes through the cities and towns of a huge country. Life is not adjusted. No big deal. After Jasper was born, his mother had to settle in one of the small southern towns. They rented a house by the sea. The head of the family was only in and out of town. The winds of wanderlust overcame his thoughts of responsibility for his family. All his visits, however, he devoted exclusively to his son. Jasper grew up surrounded by steppe diversity to the sound of sea waves. Already in kindergarten, he could fight back any older bully if he hurt him. At the age of 6, he joined a wushu class. The coach, paying attention to the bully boy, always defending all the weak in the group, brought him into the section. Even at all children's matines, Jasper always got the role of bogatars and brave astronauts. In the section, from a small age, he became his own. He quickly became respected even by the older kids. The level of skill in the martial art of wushu, to which Jasper now devoted all his free time, he reached quickly. Then over the years, only the colors of belts changed. Competitions were held, in which he often came out victorious, and his skills improved. At the age of 15, the guy could already fully serve himself. At home, he cooked perfectly, kept himself and the whole house clean. Visiting occasionally, parents only marveled. The house was in perfect order. The diary is full of good and excellent grades, and even in the refrigerator, fresh soup and cutlets and porridge. Not a guy growing up, but an enviable groom. Girls began to look at the charismatic, charming Jasper already in middle school. His appearance is remarkable. The young man, as if sculpted, nature has worked to give glamour to his manly appearance. A torso, thick hair, and steely gray eyes to keep the image from being too harsh. Mother Nature finished with a smile and rewarded Jasper's face with mischievous dimples. It seemed that with such a guy, as behind a stone wall, all the girls in the village. And they weren't wrong. At 16, Jasper fell in love. He had the misfortune to choose the wrong one. He fell in love with a girl who practiced choreography in the same club as his wushu section. This creature was sophisticated, aristocratic. Bow lips, blue eyes, blonde curls tied with a blue ribbon. She spoke, stretching her words slightly and pausing meaningfully. "Jasper, what kind of shirt are you wearing? A man with your musculature shouldn't be wearing yellow." It wasn't until a month later that they switched to you. Jasper hadn't even dreamed of kissing his date. She was fragile, she'd fall apart. But he silently circled around his dream, suffering in silence. He carried bouquets of wildflowers to every date, and she graciously placed them in a painted jug on the veranda. Then she agreed to a couple hours of walks, all the while striving to get back to the choreography machine. 2 years passed. Another gentleman in Jasper's place would have gone mad with the storm of warring desires, but he bravely endured it all. A few times they kissed, almost like pioneers. That was his entire love crop. When Stacy turned 18, he went matchmaking on his own, without parents or friends. The girl lived with a rather prim mother and grandmother, always dressed in slightly old-fashioned dresses and sundresses, with strange hairstyles and faces without a single touch of makeup. Jasper then thought, not modern relatives, it's not a problem. I don't have to live with them, but with my dream. There are all kinds of people. This is not yet the most unusual option. On the proposal to marry him, Stacy, to the complete amazement of Jasper, responded with consent. Her mother and grandmother nodded with a smart, solemn look. They canceled the lavish wedding feast and decided it would be better to use the money to organize a honeymoon trip. That way the young people could get to know each other better. Jasper counted the days and hours until the date set in August. He booked a hotel in a seaside resort. The parents paid for 2 weeks in the hotel, thinking that it would be the best gift for the children on their wedding day. The groom, after school at that time, was already working at a construction site, working hard as a bricklayer. The bride was all in art. Having received a certificate, she entered the School of Culture at the dance department. Neither could boast of high earnings. Jasper and Stacy were married at the township hall. The table was set in the yard of Jasper's parents' house. The territory of a cozy gazebo, a barbecue, and a large wooden table allowed it. The guests were few 5 guys from Jasper's martial arts section and strong girls from Stacy's dance group. Yes, parents on both sides, including Grandma. Before the vacation, the newlyweds reached Isabella, burning with impatience. Finally, he could be with his chosen one. Stacy didn't seem to care at all about Jasper's inner turmoil about their wedding night. It was as if it wasn't an important part of a strong marriage at all. Jasper dared not discuss it with her, or anything else for that matter. He was always in a stupor when it came to this side of their relationship. He sincerely thought of Stacy as not a roommate and himself as not a whole man. He agonized, how am I going to be with this delicate, fragile creature? What if I do something wrong? Before the wedding, the guys in the section laughed at him. Jasper, how will you handle your ballerina? No one around him knew that the poor guy had already gone to another city for the weekend, met a funny girl in a bar, and spent 2 days with her in her cramped apartment. The lead singer had absolutely no complexes in matters of love. In 48 hours, Jasper had learned all the science from A to Z. He was afraid of appearing inexperienced in front of Stacy and kept his voyage, which he didn't consider shameful, hidden from even his closest buddies. He wasn't a womanizer, much less a womanizer. That was his only misstep. He couldn't explain to himself why he didn't want Stacy to be his first. It was as if his gut was telling him not to. The hotel struck the young men with its splendor. The first floor was full of cafes, restaurants, stores, and beauty salons. Their 2-room suite overlooking the sea had such mesmerizing views that it was breathtaking. And what was the outdoor swimming pool like here? You wouldn't want to go to the sea. Stacy still showed no excitement about the scenery around them, and at the restaurant for dinner she only picked at the appetizingly fried fish with her fork and took a couple of sips of white wine. Jasper could think of nothing but the fact that he would soon be alone with his beloved. Everything that happened in the room left him with a double impression. On the one hand, what he'd been waiting for over 2 years had happened, but Stacy was somehow bland, obeying him in everything. No emotion, like a doll. She got up like a robot and went to wash up. It was nothing like he'd imagined it would be. What was so much mystery about it? On the other hand, he wondered endlessly, was I so bad as to disappoint my young wife so much the conversation they had had before their first wedding night also puzzled him. I understand perfectly well, Jasper, that it is my duty to fulfill my marital duty. But for God's sake, don't talk about children, and don't forget to use protection. In fact, take care of it yourself. In my line of work, having offspring is nonsense. Pregnancy and childbirth would ruin my flawless figure forever. The first pebbles of doubt they dropped resoundingly to the still empty bottom exploded in Jasper's head into 1,000 shards. He was still very much in love with his graceful dancer, but the insidious germ of doubt had taken its first roots in his soul. Then they bathed a lot in the sea and pool, walked along the promenade, as he dreamed, rode the cable car, went to cafes and restaurants. Stacy ordered only diet food. She could munch on a leaf of greens thoughtfully all evening. She reasoned that fatty meats and cheeseburgers were a disaster for a dancer, and she would refrain from grape wine, there are so many calories in it. Ironically looked at the large portions of dishes that Jasper ordered for himself. He sighed furtively, all right, I guess it's all right for you as a man. I'll abstain. At night, Stacy was not exactly cold, but somehow indifferent, like an inevitable job. She didn't wrinkle her nose, but she didn't enjoy it. Jasper was confused, thinking frantically, we've known each other for so long. And I've been such a blind, stupid, lovesick ass. I don't know this seemingly lovely woman who is now sitting across from me at a table in a restaurant. The 2 weeks which were to be the crowning of their long romance for Jasper dragged on with unexpected agony. They came home, not in a quarrel, but in a strained relationship. It was as if a cat had run between them. To all her oddities, characteristic of many women, Stacy was not at all adapted to household chores. The only things she could manage were the coffee she brought to Jasper's house from her own supplies, scrambled eggs and fried potatoes. But she had them burned to black coals. The soups were liquid and tasteless. The sink was perpetually filled with unwashed dishes. Jasper's closet was scary to look at after laundry. Seeing all these domestic metamorphoses, Jasper clutched his head. Stacy, don't make us anything for dinner. I'll come home from work and do it myself, Jasper said. Stacy was glad that her husband had decided to do this. She flew back from the School of Culture satisfied, filled with news about performances and premieres. Was her husband hungry after a hard shift? She did not care at all. At this time in the life of Jasper began to change. An old battle buddy of their coach came to the wushu class. They whispered about something in the locker room for a long time, and then Jasper and 3 other boys were invited into the office. The guest once again scrutinized all 4 of them, and then offered them to study at the academy. not forgetting to mention that it was definitely voluntary. "We are looking for young cadres with perfect physical fitness. The training will last 5 years. You will have to study in New York," he said. The words of the army friend and their trainer were immediately imprinted in Jasper's mind as if they had been hammered in with a sledgehammer. He knew at once that he wanted to study at the place he'd been offered, even if he had to divorce Stacy. The most interesting part of his love story was that his wife didn't even seem to understand what her spouse was trying to tell her. She silently listened to his desire to go to New York, to the academy, shook her head with smooth blonde curls, waved her eyelashes, and rushed away to measure a suit for some regular premiere. They divorced in absentia when he was already 3 months in New York, because he did not want to get old. His parents were still traveling across America on motorcycles, and his ex-wife was learning another PA's. Amidst all these events, Jasper was learning the science of being brave, ruthless to his enemies, steely as the strongest metal or alloy. After graduating from the academy, he was assigned to the Caucasus, and together with a mysterious friend Greg, who was a completely reckless guy. His superiors had no time to give him a command, and he was already in the thick of it. Nothing would take him. And in Besiege, he died dragging 2 guys out of a burned-out gymnasium. Jasper rushed to him, grabbed the girl and the boy, and carried them to the exit. Here's the rest of the edited text. Jasper was wounded when he had already moved a few meters away from where his comrade had died. He couldn't stop and close his eyes either, so his friend's frozen stare at the ceiling in the corridor of the besieged school sometimes haunted him in the dead of night when he couldn't sleep. Jasper had been wounded in the kneecap. The leg had failed him. He only shrieked slightly before he sat down gently on the floor and cradled the frightened little ones against him. Someone's hands picked the school children up off the floor again like a baton. Or maybe it was the blood on the floor and walls that made everything seem bright purple to him. Jasper shook his head unhappily and thought, "What the hell is this? I've only spent an hour with the new residents of Berrywood, and already so many scraps of memory from the nooks and crannies." He really didn't like to remember those tragic days. The eyes of those who searched in the general chaos for their loved ones. The medical staff at the hospital, where at first the surgeon had categorically stated that his wound was quite unfortunate. He vaguely remembered those medical terms and verbose arguments escalapa. Remembered the verdict of the old man: the leg would be better to amputate above the knee. Inflammation will go to the thigh. We'll have to cut further. He was extremely lucky that then in the operating room came an elderly woman doctor with a long experience of working with wounded soldiers. "I'll take him. We're not going to do any amputations. First, I will do what I think is necessary, and time will show which of us will be right," she said. More than 10 years had passed since then. Jasper was discharged after his injury. His leg still gave him a stubbornly persistent pain. He was even given a disability group without question. He taught for a while, but he couldn't stand in the classroom for long. His restless parents died on their old motorcycle 3 years ago. They decided to shake old times at a gathering of veteran bikers. The track was wet after a rainstorm, and they didn't make it into a tight turn. They left on the same day. The mother right at the scene of the accident, the father 2 hours later in the hospital. His parents' injuries were incompatible with life, but Jasper knew that his ancestors wouldn't have wanted a better death for themselves together, side by side, in the arms of their iron horses. Jasper didn't want to stay in his hometown any longer, so he moved closer to London, where many of his fellow servicemen had settled. In the village of Little Wilmington, he had a good life. He received a decent government paycheck. He was also surrounded by many lonely elderly women, who always invited him to help out on their allotments. They paid him with natural products: fresh eggs straight from under the laying hens, dairy products from cows, homemade pies of their own baking. So he lived well, but only at the sight of children he became sad. He didn't want to have children of his own. And now, apparently it was too late. Isabella and the twins settled into their new home in Berrywood surprisingly quickly. It was as if they'd lived there for 100 years. At first, the woman could not understand how it happened she was not the one who built the house. And yet she felt as if she knew every centimeter of the house. A chatty neighbor told her that this house belonged to very unpleasant people, as she put it, intellectuals to the bone, descendants of some Russian aristocrats. But the former owners did not talk much about their past. They spent a quiet old age in this dwelling, and then, when their strength was no longer the same, they moved to the city, closer to their children. A neighbor said that their ancestors had lived there before, but she had no information about that. Isabella's family moved to Berrywood at the beginning of the summer, as soon as the household was in relative order. The woman immediately went to the local school and kindergarten, but she was disappointed there were no vacancies for her teaching profession. There was not enough work for the villagers themselves, who were mostly surviving on subsistence farming. After some thought, Isabella decided to follow their example. The same neighbor presented her with a mini chicken with ears, and she refused to take money for the bird. "Did you buy it? We'll get even somehow else in this world," she grumpily waved away. "So if I run out of salt and sugar, you won't give me a little of it from your stock?" grumbled the neighbor. "Come on. I'll show you how to organize the henhouse better." Isabella had a strange relationship with Jasper. The woman felt that he was happy to be in their house to play with the twins. The twins themselves reciprocated with joy. First, they had patched the porch together after Amelie, the Skid Row enthusiast, had hurt her foot somewhere. Then they did something together on the roof. Isabella at first tried to keep the whole group off the roof, but Jasper said, "Their safety is my responsibility." And somehow she was at ease, trusting him. After the noisy chores, they went to the river. Jasper showed them where among the reeds there was the most convenient entrance to the water on the soft silt bank. After bathing, Isabella sat on the bank and admired how deftly Jasper swam far from the shore, leaving behind him an even line of small waves formed by the strokes of his strong, naked arms. She was for the first time surprisingly calm around this somewhat sullen, unspoken man. Sometimes she listened involuntarily to his conversations with the children. Without a shadow of irony, he taught them the proper way to stay on the water or wield a hammer. He smilingly instructed the girls on the best way to approach a chicken to get fresh eggs for breakfast. The pinnacle of their enthusiasm was a hike into the woods to get their first strawberries. Jasper showed them such a generous glade with scatterings of sweet, juice-filled berries that they were silent for a long time, only clapping the strawberries. An outing for mushrooms also became a discovery. Closer to August, there were so many mushrooms under snags and fallen leaves that the twins and Isabella, who were not used to such luxury, had their eyes wide open. Everything flew into the mushroom pouch. Jasper grinned, sat them all down on a thick log, and taught them. He laid them out on a light-colored plaid spread on the ground. He familiarized all the prey with each species, mercilessly dividing the children's prey into edible and inedible parts. In the evening, all together fried the mushrooms in a huge frying pan. Then they waited for them, poured with homemade sour cream, to acquire that unique flavor, which is inherent only in forest meadows. Jasper looked at the stove and said to Isabella, "Let me restore the old lady a little. I haven't noticed how fall has arrived. We need to get her cleaned up so we don't have any problems with her. I'd love to do a little renovation myself. I don't understand anything about its structure, but I've learned how to heat it and cook. The rest is a dark forest for me," Isabella answered readily. They decided to fix the stove tomorrow. Today, Isabella would cook something hot enough to last a couple of days. We scattered the things around the nurse. Jasper came in early for the morning. He hadn't been at home lately when it came to seeing Isabella and her children. He'd been running around like he was on a date. He tempered his ardor, and then admitted to himself the very thing that you, for the first time in so many years, you feel good, warm and cozy next to a woman. When was the last time you paid attention to the female sex? You probably can't remember. Isabella and the boys' house was all ready for the important process of renewing the stove. Jasper brought Believa tools to clean the chimney. The work went on briskly. Tom, Tobias, Maggie, and Megan were pouring out with joyful laughter every time the soot-stained face of the foreman turned toward their friendly foursome. Having finished inspecting the interior, they set about decorating the exterior. Jasper looked closely at the almost flat surface of the stove barrel, and his gaze caught on some protrusion, barely visible to the naked eye. "What the hell is that?" he wondered aloud. Isabella came closer, and while Jasper went to wash up, she cleaned off the bump with a kitchen knife. The stove was going to be plastered over now anyway, to smooth out the unevenness. Instantly, a handful of old plaster spilled onto the floor, and a small hole opened up. Curiosity took over. Isabella began to excavate the hole, rotating the knife clockwise. A couple minutes later, Jasper came back into the room. "What is this?" The man was surprised to see a whole empty cavity in the stove behind the shining masonry. There should never have been any such holes in a Russian stove. In the meantime, Isabella slipped her hand into the opening and found something cold and dusty, covered with a layer of mossy growth. She picked up something small and round with her fingers and pulled out a dull yellow round thing. On first inspection, it was clear that it was an ancient coin. The woman put her hand back into the furnace lair and determined by touch that there were many such round coins behind the supposed brickwork inside. Jasper, meanwhile, was already scrubbing the first trophy from the dirt. "I'm no good at this," he whistled, though we had a class at the academy on precious metals and other valuable objects. "Your find seems to be a gold coin of the Tsar's minting." At the General Family Council, it was decided to dismantle the masonry and see what other surprises it hides behind it. It was said done. The stash in the stove gave them 67 coins. Even through the dust of time, they were of different denominations. Jasper secretly watched to see how the lady of the house would react to the unexpected treasure. Isabella was perfectly calm, marveling with everyone else at every coin that had been removed. No greedy gleam appeared in her eyes. Not even thoughtfulness was written on her face. Jasper remembered a story about another small treasure. Once, while still in the Caucasus, they had found a pot with a few gold coins in it. One of the locals quickly prepared a soap solution and told everyone to be patient. The next day, the coins in that pot shone in the sun like new. After ordering the children to fetch a basin from the corridor, Jasper began to work on the stove, removing all the old bars of bricks, cleaning them of clumps, checking the inside again, and bricking up the hole. The former site of the treasure. Isabella at this time washed us, scolded us, put the coins on the white bottom of the dish, poured it all with warm water from the kettle. She did not even think about what to do with the acquisition. Jasper's question distracted her from her chores. "What will you do, madam, with the inheritance from the past?" She did not hesitate a moment. "I'll take 7 coins, and the rest will give to the state." The man thought to himself that he would do the same. He and Isabella looked at the wonders of the world with the same eyes. An epiphany flashed through his mind. He realized who Isabella reminded him of all the time. The comparison was strange. It seemed to him like the beautiful oriole bird he had so often met in the woods. The caring mother oriole always hovered around her nest, which looked like a small wicker basket, and tended to her chicks, eagerly opening their beaks in anticipation of food. It was a golden nest, and Jasper suddenly thought that the other woman would have stashed the coins away and taken them out one by one from time to time. But this woman had thought that she would not eat of other people's goods. She decided to give her find to the authorities without complaint. That's odd. The whole company spent the rest of the evening working with the coins with enthusiasm. Jasper finished the job with a match. The children watched the process of washing the coins in the basin. The profile of Emperor Nicholas II was already clearly visible there. On other coins, the double-headed eagle, the emblem of the great Russian Empire, peeped through, creating the illusion that in the basin there was some sacrament of cleansing the coins from centuries of sins. No one knew. Maybe this treasure is some mysterious family legend. By late afternoon, everyone was exhausted. Isabella heated up the nourishing dishes she had prepared beforehand. At dinner, everyone was tiredly silent, even the twins who never stopped talking. After the meal, the children sleepily drifted off to their bedrooms. Isabella went to see Jasper off. Then the unexpected happened. She suddenly put her arm around his shoulders from behind and asked, "Will you stay?" Jasper staggered back in surprise. At that moment, he realized a truth he had been shamefully hiding even from himself. He wanted this woman very much to be near him. From the first moment he'd seen her in the van and held her gaze for a long moment. Jasper turned around swiftly. Despite his injury, he felt a rush of energy, as if he'd drunk a magic elixir filled with adrenaline. He picked Isabella up in his arms as if in a fog and carried her to the bed. There had never been another man in Isabella's life but Artem. In Jasper's fate, there was Nastya and a string of casual one-night stands whose names he sometimes didn't even know or couldn't remember. In rare moments of rest, Jasper could vaguely think, I haven't had all those women in my life that I've known before. They may not be worth a fingernail on the little finger of the one who is now serenely embracing me. Isabella's thoughts flowed smoothly in the same direction. Did you think that your husband, who has caused you so much trouble, was the end of the world? Holy naivete. A man like Jasper is a man you should cling to and never let go of. Before dawn, Jasper whispered in Isabella's ear that it was time for him to go, but not because he wanted to. He would stay by her side forever. He had a lingering feeling that they were together now, that Isabella thought so too, that they would share all the chores equally. 2 days later, they had thoroughly laundered all 67 gold coins. Jasper and Isabella took them to the local police station. They were now only doing everything together, just as Jasper had envisioned. And it felt so natural, as if they had been living as a family for a long time. Before the process of transferring the treasure to the state, Jasper read the internet, how according to the law all the correct formalization, prepared a photo of the oven, located in the surprise, took pictures of the coins, laid out in even rows on the kitchen table. Except that the testimony of witnesses to the discovery of the treasure could not be formalized. All 4 twins were still minors and incapacitated. In the police, the whole department gathered to gaze at the miracle. The act of handing over the coins was drawn up without delay. Isabella was informed that after the evaluation of the found by experts, she will be paid a sum of money in the amount of 50% of the income received by the Treasury. According to the most modest calculations, the amount of remuneration was solid. On the way back from the district center, Jasper and Isabella were silent. Each was thinking about something else. They spoke at the same time, as if they had both made the only right decision. "I want to take the children from the orphanage," the woman began. "I want to be with you and your twins, and all the children will have," Jasper replied. Isabella had brought up the orphanage for a reason. At the end of the summer, they'd gone to the nearest town to buy backpacks and stationery. Maria and Veronica were going to first grade for the first time this year, and the more experienced boys were going to third grade. A small bus stopped near the stationery store. There were a lot of children of different ages, and there were only 2 chaperones. Irie immediately realized the boys from the orphanage were brought for notebooks and pens. She would have immediately forgotten this meeting, but she was pinned to the floor by the gaze of one boy. He looked at her children and at herself, hugging them by the shoulders. So many unfulfilled dreams of her own family, her parents, and a deep longing were in his gaze that Isabella was embarrassed and quickly led her school children away to another store. Jasper and Isabella returned to their conversation about starting a family orphanage after she received the money she was owed for finding the treasure. There was no doubt about spending the windfall to build a luxury mansion for themselves. On the contrary, they gathered a general family meeting in the presence of the twins, who happily accepted the fact that Jasper and their mother were now together, without asking too many questions. The agenda was, would everyone be willing to vote to make their family even bigger? Suggestions came in a variety of ways. "Let's look for twins at the orphanage," 2 Maggie suggested. "We'll only take boys," said Emmett and Tobias. "Guys, why don't we not make the rules beforehand?" "Your heart will tell you," Isabella asked. "I have an idea," Jasper said, embarrassed. "We need to find out in our neighborhood children's institution which of the children there is the most difficult." Isabella and Jasper felt a little uncomfortable in the orphanage manager's office. Half an hour ago, they had told the director what they wanted to do. "I can't deny that you surprised me," she replied. "Children with complicated backgrounds and problems are usually rejected by prospective adoptive parents right away. Everyone wants that, if they have already decided to take such an extraordinary step. Their future children would be without flaws." She went into the archive for a long time with the cases of wards, and then brought them 5 folders. "These are my most deprived, most difficult cases. Familiarize yourself with their stories. I'll come out and give you time to make a decision." Isabella resolutely reached into the top folder, opened the cover. From the first page, the serious eyes of a boy of about 10 looked up at her. Even in the photo, there was such bitterness in them that she felt uneasy. The name was Kirill. He had been living in the orphanage for 3 years. His parents were killed in a car accident, and he himself was thrown under the wheels of the truck responsible for the tragedy. His leg just below the knee had to be amputated. There is no doubt that the boy is well adapted to the prosthesis, serves himself independently. The characterization said withdrawn, poorly socialized, sometimes aggressive. Jasper, to whom she was reading all this aloud, felt a chill run down his spine at his own memories. He glanced at Isabella, but she smiled warmly back, understanding without words. She already knew the story of his injury. So here's the first candidate to join us. Are you in? Isabella asked. I'm in. I thought you'd be embarrassed by his injury. Not at all. I'm sure we can effect a change in his character and disposition. The children will understand our choice too. I don't doubt that, Jasper said. Isabella pulled the next folder from the bottom for some reason and untied the straps. This time it was the file of a girl named Catherine. From the photograph, she was staring at her with attentive eyes, magnified by some kind of peculiar glasses. Age 7 years. In need of serious ophthalmologic surgery. Waiting for a quota for a place in an eye clinic. Straight A student. She's into drawing, plasticine, molding, burning. What do you think? Jasper said questioningly. The twins had just taken all the supplies of blank sketchbooks, plasticine, and paints up to the attic. We'll have to climb up and bring it all back, Isabella summarized bluntly. Now 2 folders were put aside, but the potential owners of the future family orphanage did not think to stop there. The next folder immediately elicited smiles. In it lay the file of one of the 2 twin brothers, and next to it the biography of the second. However, they had them as if they were copied. The trouble with these 2 boys was that although they had been orphaned a long time ago, no one of the adopters dared to take in a family of 2, prone to petty hooliganism in their 10 years. Our girls and boys will be happy. Let's fulfill their wish, Isabella decided at once. Yes, Comrade Commander. Jasper sang along. There was one more folder on the edge of the table. It contained the file of 5-year-old Lucy. The girl had a disease rumored to affect the greats of this world: Socrates, Newton, Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky, Pythagoras and Nobel. Lucy's extraordinary abilities had already been noticed: phenomenal memory, the ability at her age to quickly add up 2-digit numbers. The name of the disease is epilepsy. At the time of the Roman Emperor Caesar, who also suffered from this disease, it was also called the carrion disease. Treatment was only needed to correct it. Jasper and Isabella looked at each other and said nothing. The folder moved smoothly to the others. At the same time, his mistress entered the office. Here is the corrected text, taking into account your requirements. The children will also understand us in this choice. I don't doubt that, Jasper said. For some reason, Isabella pulled the next folder from the bottom and untied the straps. This time it was the file of a girl named Catherine. From the photograph, she was staring at her with attentive eyes, magnified by some kind of peculiar glasses. Age 7 years. In need of serious ophthalmologic surgery. Waiting for a quota for a place in an eye clinic. Straight A student. She's into drawing, plasticine, molding, burning. What do you think? Jasper said questioningly. The twins had just taken all the supplies of blank sketchbooks, plasticine and paints up to the attic. We'll have to climb up and bring it all back, Isabella summarized bluntly. Now 2 folders were put aside, but the potential owners of the future family orphanage did not think to stop there. The next folder immediately elicited smiles. In it lay the file of one of the 2 twin brothers, and next to it the biography of the second. However, they had them as if they were copied. The trouble with these 2 boys was that, although they had been orphaned a long time ago, no one of the adopters dared to take in a family of 2, prone to petty hooliganism in their 10 years. Our girls and boys will be happy. Let's fulfill their wish, Isabella decided at once. Yes, Comrade Commander. Jasper sang along. There was one more folder on the edge of the table. It contained the file of 5-year-old Lucy. The girl had a disease rumored to affect the greats of this world: Socrates, Newton, Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky, Pythagoras and Nobel. Lucy's extraordinary abilities had already been noticed: phenomenal memory, the ability at her age to quickly add up 2-digit numbers. The name of the disease is epilepsy. At the time of the Roman Emperor Caesar, who also suffered from this disease, it was also called the carrion disease. Treatment was only needed to correct it. Jasper and Isabella looked at each other and said nothing. The folder moved smoothly to the others. At the same time, his mistress entered the office. Having looked at the folders, the director said, I told you that it is better to choose a child not from this list. These all get rejected at once. Why go to such trouble when there are many other offers? You misunderstand, U.S. Jasper replied. We want to adopt all these kids, take them to our family orphanage in Riverside. There is a middle school and a kindergarten there. What paperwork do we need to gather to finalize all the formalities sooner? The principal, stunned, fell silent, and when she was able to speak again, tears glistened in the corners of her eyes. You guys are amazing. If I hadn't witnessed it myself, who would have believed it? You are making a difference in these kids' lives. Riverside is bustling with activity. Around Jasper's tall figure, the boys are busy building their own wood-fired bathhouse. Jasper has promised that everyone will be assigned their own work. Matthew is appointed foreman. His task is to distribute building materials, distribute tools to the kids, keep records of logs, nails, and other small things. The boy's pride is so great that he has almost stopped limping. The other 4 twins are exhausted that the process has not started. Especially Jasper promised to take everyone to the river in the evening. Under the apple tree, Stacy sits on the swing. She recently had eye surgery and her face is still in bandages, but they say that when the bandages come off, she'll have almost 100% vision. Amelie, Megan, and Annie are helping their mom, Isabella. They decided to bake pies with different fillings: cabbage, mushrooms, and apples, which the boys picked from an old tree in the morning. Isabella has had a hard time managing the house alone lately. By the end of the fall, they were expecting a new addition to their family. Jasper would become a father for the 10th time, and Isabella would become a mother, of course. On the thick branches of the apple tree, camouflaged by green leaves due to the coloring, sit chicks. The oriole watched the people and thought, these people have everything like us: a big nest. There is a mother preparing food for her chicks. Good attracts good. Even a small oriole knows this law. She wasn't going to teach anyone. The bird reasoned. That's why everything in their house is fine and good. The oriole looked back at her hungry chicks in the nest. And I have to go to my babies. I have a lot of things to do. I've already been here for a long time, admiring this family idyll. Having made the last circle over the apple tree, she soared into the sky, rejoicing that there are such wonderful people in the world, living by the laws of kindness and care, like birds.